The girl is sitting on the ground holding a stick in her hands with which she is trying to move a bag lying on the street. The brunette frowns, not understanding how it all ended up like this. Someone threw out the garbage bags right in front of the house and left, pretending it didn't happen. Having moved aside the lying garbage, the lady froze because there was a man lying on the ground covered in blood. He looked like a large piece of human garbage. With a stick, she removed the hair from his face. The brunette thought that the man had been dead for a long time, but he began to move. The heroine was forced to jump back. But looking closely, she began to realize something. The girl had seen a guy lying in front of her somewhere. He was handsome and his snow-white hair was beautiful. This man sprinkled a perfect novel with a handful of thriller and was obsessed with murders and the main character. Avalon Lakios was the name of the man. This story happened several years ago when the girl was an orphan from the slums. Drug dealers at that time kidnapped unfortunate children. Then the hero was pursued until he fell to the ground. The smell made her head hurt. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she was in a laboratory tied to a canopy. In that place, an unknown substance was injected into the orphan which made the blood run cold in her veins. When the heroine fell unconscious, the scientists realized that she had also died. They did not feel sorry for the baby, only for the fragments that were wasted. The girl wanted to cry, but she didn't have the strength. She understood that she would die like this, and that was normal because she knew that she had already suffered enough. And suddenly everything turned upside down. A web formed around the body, and then the maiden fell asleep in a cocoon. When her eyes opened, it became incredibly painful. It felt as if the body was ready to break into small pieces. The child did not understand where she was. A huge spider appeared in front of her, which scared her, and the girl rushed from her place and tried to run away as quickly as possible. Running away without looking back, the blonde saw a panorama of her past life in which she was not a lonely orphan, but had parents and a cute dog named Coco. The gaze noticed a book lying on the table. It was called Flower Link. The heroine read it 10 times and then was in love with a secondary character at the end of the panorama. She died because of a car. Everything ended. There was noise all around. The body returned to reality. The hands tenaciously tore the web. Time flew by in an instant, while in reality 3 years had passed. The substance introduced by the scientists turned out to be a fragment with an unknown force which gave power over the web. Instead of enhancing all 5 senses, he erased them completely. Drowning out emotions, those gathered began to ask about her health and mood. Of course, it was not very good, because in the past, the heroine died under the wheels of a truck. In the new life, normal existence was simply taken away for the sake of research on the body. The lady understood that everything was strange because she did not feel anything. The woman was captured and locked in a cage. The scientists understood that Arachne was becoming stronger and knew that she might have to be isolated. The security became stricter. The lady had little time. One day, the laboratory was attacked, explosions were heard all around, and then Arachne realized that it was time for her to run. Having got out of the cage, she rushed along the corridors towards the exit. Something made her stop. Many people appeared in the distance among the screams. The brunette realized that the attacker was Lakios. The scientists were worried. They needed to inform the director. Due to weakened feelings, the lady did not even feel fear but still hid behind one of the columns. Instead of emotions, the beauty was left with only animal instincts. There was a hum inside, and a voice seemed to repeat that if she collided with a man, she would certainly die. She did not want such a death because it would be terrible. The scientists and defenders rushed from side to side, wanting to stop Lakios. They thought that changes had already begun in the Carnimal family. The girl still standing behind thought. It didn't take long to remember that she knew those words. It was something familiar from the novel Flower Link. It was a thriller novel that the lady had read in her past life. The worst villain of the book was Avalon Lakios, who was now standing just down the hallway, approaching the people, announcing that the research center would be closed. Someone tried to attack, but nothing worked, and in the end the blonde destroyed the laboratory, not sparing a single person working at the institute. In Arachne's case, everything was simpler. Reincarnation, which was not mentioned even briefly in the novel, was possible. Taking advantage of the sudden chaos, the girl was able to escape and did not die. The lady remembered Avalon, whom she began to consider human trash, and every time she shuddered at the thought of what would happen if she were accidentally caught. The brunette dreamed, thinking that it would be great if she were born some kind of aristocrat's mistress or masseuse. Now the lady is just a semblance of the main character. She was the daughter of a billionaire who at the time of the events disappeared after a shipwreck. What happened led to the collapse of the family and their persecution as debtors. The girl, who found herself in a difficult situation but treated everyone with kindness, met the true love she was waiting for. Because of the main villain, the maiden never saw a happy ending. He covered everything in blood. The butcher, who was killing people without restraint, was now near the heroine. She saw him lying in front of her. Earlier, the girl learned that she was created in a laboratory and therefore did not want to live, but over time everything changed. She stopped being a helplessly suffocating creature. The man was lucky that he was unconscious. Lakios won't have to suffer, he'll just die. The girl was about to finish what she started, but she heard a creak with the speed of light. She threw the body away and turned around. A blonde was standing on the threshold. She heard the noise and came. Yuri froze. She began to understand that perhaps Carnemele was not following her, but on the contrary, he came to meet Anne-Marie 5 months ago. She moved into the house next door. On her first day, the girl came and greeted me politely. She was not against getting acquainted when she opened the door. The lady immediately understood who was in front of her and froze in horror. The blonde was extremely talkative. She said that she had moved many times, but all this time there were no peers around her. She only had a younger sister with a big age difference. The beauty was happy, realizing that she would finally have someone new to know. She introduced herself as Anne-Marie Blunt and explained that her sister's name was Hestia. The brunette realized that there definitely couldn't be a mistake, because the main character was in front of her. Yuri just didn't understand what the girl was doing in such a place and why she came. Although Anne-Marie's fate is terrible in the original, she still saves Lakios, who fell right in front of his house, and a connection is formed between them. Upon learning about those who hurt the lady, the man kills them all. Things went so far that in the second half of the novel, Blunt saved Avalon again in the end. She wished Yuri wanted to stay away from the girl. Somehow fate brought them together. The beauty also told that she recently ran into another neighbor. She heard that the new neighbor works in a large coffee shop, which is most likely located on Blue Pirate Street. Frowning, the lady rudely asked what would happen if it was true. Anne-Marie abruptly began to apologize. They had met recently, and she began to ask something personal from the doorway. It looked more like rudeness. The blonde planned to start working at the treatment center opposite the cafe. For some reason, the lady strongly resembled Coco. She had the same pitiful look as the dog. The brunette decided not to put too much pressure on her and nodded. Everything was fine. If Anne-Marie worked in a treatment center, they would be able to see each other often. There should only be advantages from this. The novel said that Blunt moved into a dilapidated house, but something didn't add up. The place where the girl and her sister settled couldn't be called terrible. It was beautiful. The blonde almost always couldn't leave Yuri alone. The green-eyed one suggested having dinner together. She and Hestia usually eat late, so they made it just in time. The woman said that she had already eaten. It was clear that her interlocutor was slightly upset, but smiling, she said that she was glad a crash was heard. Something broke, so the blonde should leave. The beauty turned and quickly moved on. She didn't know what would happen to the main villain if he came to the wrong house. In the original, Lakios was lying in front of Anne-Marie's house. Yuri decided to follow only the original plot. Blunt shouldn't have known the truth and shouldn't have blamed, because there was no mention of the lady in the book. The girl had already sent the web when Blunt returned. The girl held out a whole plate of freshly baked cookies. They had baked them together with Hestia. The brunette often treated the little girl to something tasty. Once again, the lady began to understand how much the new neighbor resembled Coco. Deciding not to fight her feelings, Yuri promised that she would definitely eat everything. This made Blunt even happier. The girl decided to make a real remark. She noted that it is not worth going outside when it is already late. The area is unsafe, and therefore it is worth being as careful as possible. Anne-Marie seemed not to see the problem. The sound of her steps was very similar to Yuri's. The heroine tried to explain very clearly someone could imitate her gait, and then there would be problems. The beauty did not know that such a person existed in the world, but he was not so far away on the road. Nevertheless, the heroine promised to be more careful and left. The brunette realized that as soon as Carnamale appeared in front of the main character's house, a real thriller would begin. It was hard to believe that Lachios was so addicted to the lady he wanted to remove all the people around the maiden, kidnap her, and keep her near him so that no one would dare look at her again. In the end, the young man even planned to kill Hestia so that she would not get underfoot. The girl realized that she could not leave everything as it was, since the confusion caused helped her escape from the laboratory. There was nothing left to do but follow her desires. The lady would be the one to throw out the main villain. First, she brought him into the house and noticed that the wounds became larger, perhaps because she hit him. The man remained unconscious. His shirt was covered in bright red spots. Judging by the wounds, the attacker was aiming for fatal places. With such damage, even Blunt's power would hardly have helped, although the lady was not a product of the laboratory's experiments, but she, like her neighbor, has the power of fragments. Having appeared in the central part of the continent, the substance broke into fragments that flew in different directions and seeped into the people. Of course, there were problems that were not so easy to get rid of. Many died precisely because of the side effects, which made one doubt. Anne-Marie was rather lucky. Instead of dying, she received the power of healing. These abilities were similar to those that came from the relics. Mrs. Yuri also didn't have much of a choice in the laboratory. She was forcibly given a power that she didn't want. Unfortunately, then, everything wasn't so simple in her life. Blunt's healing abilities, which had awakened on their own, were different from the heroine's, which is why Lachios became even more attached to her. The woman tore the boy's shirt with a web and noticed the wounds being the main villain. The man most likely would not fall in love with the lady for trying to help him. After the girl carried out the disinfection, she began the operation and carefully stitched up all the wounds that were on the body. The girl did not have any medicine, but she planned to take it from her friend. The lady decided to leave. Lachios was still lying unconscious when an annoying voice rang in his head, ordering him to get up. Yuri had been in the coffee shop since early morning. The boss asked the girl to go to the table because someone had ordered lemonade. As expected, the man did not return to the east. In the novel, the rich aristocrats divided the country into eastern, western, southern, and northern parts to govern it. For them, it was simpler and more understandable. The heroine lived in the east, which is under the control of the family of Carleon Crockford. The main character, the girl, was worried that she might meet him, but in the end she chose the comforts of civilization. Another rich man from the east is a minor character, being an outstanding alchemist. He developed various convenient devices for people. Electricity was invented to replace candles, a food heater, similar to a gas stove, and a freezer, which now allowed food to be stored in the cold, all devices that could only have been invented by Eastern alchemists. The East is small. The export of products from there was strictly prohibited. Yuri did not understand how to resolve everything and was so immersed in her thoughts that she completely forgot that she was at work. The head of the coffee shop approached the girl and brought her out of her thoughts. She must be tired thanks to her. There were more customers. They could hire another worker to make things a little easier. The girl smiled radiantly, assuring that she was fine. In fact, she just hadn't slept enough and would like to get more sleep. She couldn't tell that the villain was the cause. Anne-Marie came to the coffee shop. The brunette invited her to sit at a table and have a cup of coffee with her. She was just about to take a rest while there were no customers. The blonde waited until the coffee was ready and then handed over the bag. Inside was what she had been asked for in the morning. Most likely the necessary medications. The heroine thanked her. She was going to come by after work, but in the end, everything turned out like this. Blunt didn't ask her for money, and after taking a sip from the mug, the girl thanked her for the delicious drink. The green-eyed girl suddenly announced that she was going to leave early. She asked to keep her company. The brunette thought about it at first, although she knew in advance what the answer would be. Yuri said that she had a meeting planned, so most likely nothing would work out between them, sadly lowering her head. The heroine nodded, but they promised to spend time with her next time. The woman was left alone when a piece of paper fell into her hands. It seemed that a new task had appeared. When evening came, the heroine went out. Usually during the day, she was in a coffee shop, but with the onset of night, she went on assignments for the dark world. Having made her way to the place, the lady looked around carefully. She went down and, in a second, wrapped 2 guards in a cocoon consisting of her web. The brunette did not want such powers, however, since they came to her anyway. She was not going to bury them under any circumstances. The beauty spends them for good, so that in the end she can live peacefully. When the heroine went down to the lower lot, people noticing her began to panic and shout, asking who she was. The woman did not want to listen to them but simply got down to work. Just 10 minutes later, the lady sat and wondered why Anne-Marie looked so much like Coco, the dog. She wanted to know why the lady had moved to another place. The heroine turned to one of the captives asking how much Blunt's new house cost. The man could not answer because his mouth was also tied. Yuri always regretted that she couldn't live a calm and quiet life. Now it was time to finish the job. If the guards weren't so rebellious, everything would have ended differently. The woman was about to cut her web, letting the tied victims fall. She mockingly reassured them that since the height was only 10 meters, no one would be hurt. Some young man said that the documents were under the stairs. The heroine at the last moment grabbed his body and carefully lowered it to the ground, also without untying it. She left. She did not want to go back home. Lakios infuriated the heroine with both her eyes open and closed. The brunette thought that she should have left him to die on the street, but in any case she had no choice. The girl came back. There was no choice. She bent down to check on Lakios and was about to leave when he grabbed her hand and opened her eyes. It became scary. He should not have woken up so early. The blonde remembered what happened before he fainted. He was dragging himself through the streets, barely breathing. He was tired and wanted to lie down and rest while the voice in his head forced him to wake up and go on. The blue-eyed man looked at her with a dark gaze, and then the heroine realized that he was still not in his right mind. His eyes reflexively opened, but nothing more. The brunette asked him to lie down and sleep a little more. The man was not in any danger. He needed to rest a little more. The beauty carefully laid him back down, making him calm down a little. There was a bruise on his arm. He still clung on tightly. The character, due to his activity, accidentally made it so that all the wounds that the lady tried to heal opened up again in the morning. The girl was completely tired. She could neither sleep nor breathe because of the threat to her life. Finally, the young man woke up. The lady standing by the window turned to ask how the man was feeling. His eyes lit up with a strange feeling. The brunette noticed that the atmosphere in the room had suddenly changed greatly. Yuri decided not to pay attention and instead asked not to move too much so that the wounds would not open again. The blonde wanted to say something, but instead he started coughing heavily. The hero probably didn't remember, but the day before he fell unconscious in front of the beauty's house. The man looked like he had let his guard down. He continued to stare at the heroine. She couldn't stand it and asked what happened. She had to go to work before leaving. She explained that everything she needed was on the table, and if anything happened, she could continue sleeping. The woman would really like the hero to disappear. However, she understood that for now this was impossible. As soon as silence fell, the blue-eyed man wondered what kind of mistress would leaving a stranger in her house. The beauty was either heartless or good-natured, Lakios thought, and then again the same voice was heard that could not believe that the man was alive. The young man did not understand why he was shouting so loudly. The voice even made his ears ring, which made him feel disgusted. The stranger began to shout even louder, not understanding how such a thing could be said to someone who cared. The spirit began to resent when they noticed that he was not even human. Anyone in his place would have thought that the master was really finished, judging by what happened. Blue-eyed should be careful. What is inside will die with him. He was just lucky, but next time it could be worse. The hero does not believe in this, because the one he trusted the most stuck a knife in his back. The spirit again reminds of the fact that he repeatedly warned about the possible risks, not wanting to listen to anything else. Lakios agreed and turned to the wall. He still needed a little more rest. The blonde should have known that the man would gain power. He thought he had completely destroyed the lab with all the people there. He should have asked for help from what was inside him. Darkness decided to change the subject to continue to get on his nerves. He noticed that the gentleman seemed to be fascinated by that woman. His heart was beating like crazy, as if she was his ideal. The hero could have denied it, but he was almost ruined by the words that were said so inopportunely. At that time, Yuri was heading to work. She noticed that someone had been following her since the moment she left the house. The man pretended that he had nothing to do with it, but still stopped when the heroine stopped. The girl used her cunning and led the stranger into a dead end. He could not believe that everything ended like this. The lady came up from behind and in a split second wrapped the young man in a cocoon. She said that she would return later because due to the difficult day, she had no need to stay and control everything in the smallest details. The girl remembered how everything was in the novel when Anne-Marie found Lachios at her house, then brought him inside. He woke up and she introduced herself asking what the name of her patient was. Instead of showing even a modicum of friendliness, the man grabbed the woman's hand and slapped it away, an evil light burning in his eyes that did not bode well. The heroine could not expect that after putting on one bandage, she would make him be favorable to her. The girl seemed to want to become the guy's savior, but he really didn't like this arrangement. He grabbed the lady by the throat and ordered her not to bother him. Even in a terrible state, it would not have been difficult for him to erase her from the world. Yuri understood that the whole plot had completely changed. Now the same man was lying on her couch covered in blood. You couldn't tell that he was the Lord of Darkness. He came himself, but now he couldn't even get up. The hero began to toss and turn. Apparently he had an unpleasant dream, or the fever had started again. The lady gently put her palm to his forehead. She noticed that the condition had improved a little, but not completely. Having pulled off her clothes a little, Arachne was surprised at how quickly the wounds on her body were healing. In 2 days, the condition had improved. Perhaps he could not be classified as an ordinary person. After all, he was a villain. The girl assumed that Lachios also had the power of the moon fragment. There was no mention of this in the book, but if you think about it, it doesn't seem like a man could destroy an entire laboratory on his own. The lady thought it seems that changes have taken place in the country. There was no guarantee that all the circumstances would happen exactly as in the novel, and of course, everything changed. The only thing the heroine did not understand was what this had to do with her. The lady brought men's clothes from work, but began to doubt that they would suit her uninvited guest. Although the hero survived but lost a fair amount of blood, the brunette would have liked to receive at least some kind of reward for nursing him back to health. However, given the whole situation, it didn't look like she had any chance of getting anything. In the middle of the night, the young man finally woke up through the pain. He sat up in bed and froze, because next to him lay a lady who had fallen asleep, sitting on a chair. His hand gently reached out to his head to touch it. The girl felt that someone was touching her hair, and therefore almost immediately jumped up. Their palms collided because she wanted to push him away from herself. Something inside turned over, touching the man's fingers. An inexplicable feeling came. Tears flowed from her eyes, and this made her even more surprised. All feelings were erased in the laboratory, but it seemed that something had changed. For the first time in a long time, the girl felt warmth and joy that had not been with her before. The blonde was also surprised. He quickly realized that he was not able to control himself. He did not want to endure the strange sensations any longer, so he quickly wanted to pull his hand away and leave. The girl realized that now that same little grain would be taken away again, and so she grabbed the wrist with force. The blue-eyed man tried to say something, but they did not let him go. This persistence was embarrassing. Since even then the heroine did not let go of the wrist, a chain reaction began. The girl accidentally fell on the man, who again ended up on the bed. The glass standing on the table broke and water spilled on the floor. The woman realized the situation she was in. It only made her even more embarrassed. Last night, while taking care of Lachios, she accidentally fell asleep. Although she didn't think it was possible, then she felt someone touching her hair and woke up. Somehow it turned out that now the two were lying next to each other. Despite the absurdity of the situation, the lady really did not want to let go of Carnamale, as if something was pulling her body straight towards him. The young man blushed. He cleared his throat, but his voice was still very quiet. The guy noted that it would be great if the lady let go of his hand. After these words, the heroine almost immediately jumped back. She immediately apologized, hoping that she would be forgiven for her small mistake. Her face became stony again. As soon as the physical contact was interrupted, all feelings disappeared just as they had been before. The strange phenomenon made her doubt. But the maiden still could not find out the details. She apologized again, saying that she had behaved tactlessly in her sleep. It was unintentional. Avalon must have been unpleasant. The hero shook his head. He quickly went to look for something, and after a few seconds, having found a pen and a notebook lying on the table, he began to actively write something. Carnimal himself asked for forgiveness, because he himself had behaved tactlessly. The brunette smiled warmly. The neighbors still need to try to help, even though the blonde is not her friend since he ended up nearby by complete accident. The words spoken seemed to drive him into euphoria again. The blue-eyed man began to write something with even greater zeal. He had some thoughts that the lady did not yet fully know about. The young man showed the paper. He understood that he had not yet fully recovered, so he asked to stay for a few more days. The lady could not refuse, considering how she was asked about it. The girl also had her own opportunity when she touched the hand. A strange phenomenon occurred. She needed to find out everything getting up. She nodded. In such a state it would be nice to rest a little more. At first, Lakios didn't believe that Yuri had agreed so easily, but he couldn't ask the question. The woman was about to leave when she was grabbed by the sleeve. It seemed that the man had finally shown his true nature, but no, on the piece of paper was written, "I want to know the name of such a noble man." The girl answered the question and was told that the name was very suitable. The boy looked surprisingly pleased, and then wrote his name too. There was nothing left to do but to return the compliment. As soon as the door closed, something happened inside. The worm was probably to blame for what happened. He probably used the ability of the fragments, although the master said that it cannot be used on others. Darkness immediately began to justify himself. He did not try to change anything and agreed that the moment when the lady touched his hand was strange. The girl was most likely not ordinary. For some reason, the blonde remembered his past. When he was on the street with Zenas Sheldon, he mocked him, admitting that for a person like him, that time everything played out much better than expected. He remembered the hero's name, but not for long. It was better for him to wallow in the mud, because even greater blows were inflicted on the body again. The red-haired man could barely breathe, but asked Carnimale not to touch Anne-Marie and Hestia. Before finishing everything, the blonde grinned. He did everything to make the girls comfortable, but it was this man who stole them. Jumping up on the bed, Yuri began to try to breathe. It was just a nightmare, but very realistic. The heroine dreamed of her beloved Zenas Sheldon, but she remembered the details very poorly. Yet there was a strange feeling inside her that made her shrink. The lady realized that it was already morning, so she opened the curtains with a slight movement. The brunette was not going to think about what happened, deciding to write it all off as some stupid dream. Entering the blonde's room, she decided to open the curtains, and there sunlight always has a positive effect on well-being. Just about to finish what she had started, the beauty froze. A man was sitting on the sofa who had already woken up. He turned to the lady, and she thought that it seemed that because of what had happened, he had seen everything. Trying to calm the jumping voice, the lady turned to Lakios and quietly asked why he was not sleeping anymore. She asked about his health, but in response she received only silence. The young man was so quiet that the lady forgot about his existence for a moment. Approaching the window, the woman continued, "If the guy didn't mind, she could open the curtains. Maybe the hero wasn't fully awake yet, but it was time for Yuri to get ready to go to work." The blonde wrote on the sheet that he was fine. His face also remained sad inside. The lady hoped that since there was no reaction, the trick with the web performed earlier was probably not noticed. The room was dark, so the girl used her powers just a little. In any case, she realized that it was worth at least a little while to refrain from using her powers at home so as not to be noticed. The worm began to call Lakios to notice something interesting instead of listening. The young man lowered his head into his hands. The girl was in her pajamas, and this embarrassed him even more. Such a reaction made the inner darkness angry. The hero again had that same strange feeling that he had before. He definitely saw something sparkling that was shining from the girl's hand. When she entered the room, he doesn't understand what exactly it was. Yuri came into the room again, already completely collected. The lady brought plates of food. She made something other than bread because she thought that it would be difficult for the victim to eat. When the plate appeared on the table, Carnimale froze and twisted his face. He did not like the contents, but the brunette remained calm, declaring that stewed meat with seafood was quite healthy. The darkness inside Lakios screamed again. Not understanding if the man was really going to eat something that looked so suspicious, he knew that the owner would not die even if he drank poison, but he still continued to scream. The blonde carefully took the spoon and put some food in his mouth. He couldn't speak, and it was clear from his face that he obviously didn't like it. He wanted to immediately spit out everything that was in his cheeks. Smiling, the lady advised to finish the meal as quickly as possible. She was going to leave for work, so she did not stay nearby to supervise. Lakios had no choice. He didn't want to upset the woman, so he behaved exactly like that. Half an hour later, he finished everything he had. His stomach started to hurt, and he realized that he needed to take the medicine quickly. The young man dragged himself to the kitchen. He needed to find something for digestion. For some reason, the room was empty. Almost all the cupboards were not filled with anything except a few loaves of bread and salt. Finally, the hero thought that he would find something in the closet. There were strange dolls with various clothes on them. The darkness, just like the owner, was scared because such a nice lady could not have something so strange. While at work, Yuri thought about what happened in the morning. She didn't remember if she had oversalted the meat. She tried to find a reason why the guy might not have liked the prepared dish. The brunette went outside and looked around. She remembered the man who had followed her in the evening. She should go and find out from him who had hired him to put on such a show. When the girl arrived, she looked around. It became clear that the man was dead. There was blood around the cocoon. Apparently, the person who sent him found the poor guy before he could blurt out anything. The girl examined the body one last time and began to understand that everything was not just like that. There were familiar wounds on the body. Vital organs were affected again. Only one person could have done this, and the heroine would teach him a proper lesson. Yuri went to work. The dream last night had seriously disturbed her, or rather brought her back to reality. She shouldn't forget what kind of person was in her house. At one of the tables sat a lady's acquaintance named Snow. He, as usual, began to chat because this activity was perhaps his only entertainment. The weather was sunny outside. Instead of stating his order, the man handed over a sunflower with a broken stem. The woman yelled at him because she was fed up instead. She again insistently asked him to name everything he wanted to buy. The girl said that she does not accept gifts. It is not her style at all. The young man wanted to keep the flower for himself, but he took it and broke, which made me doubt a little he just wanted to show it, nothing more. Yuri herself knew that a regular guest would want to order. The man assumed that he was interesting to the girl because she knew in advance. The beauty sighed with displeasure and left. Even if it was true, the hero came to the cafe constantly. The long hair did not show anything unusual, but the purple eyes very much meant that he was the protector of the eastern part of the country. The maiden's favorite character, Zenos Sheldon, also had the same eye color. He was a minor character who met all the beauty standards. Every time Anne-Marie needed help, he like a ghost appeared out of nowhere and became her support. Sometimes the man was friendly, sometimes playful, and sometimes angry. The brunette sitting in the cafe was completely different from him. There was no doubt that Zenos was written out of the novel for some reason. Before meeting Blunt, the young man lived hiding his appearance and name. For some time, the brunette followed that guy, but he turned out to be an ordinary slacker that day. He again thanked for the coffee paid and was about to leave. Anne-Marie arrived at the cafe, smiling radiantly as usual. The hero walked past the girl on his way out as if she was nothing. If he were Sheldon, he could have reacted somehow. Smiling back at her friend, the lady asked what had happened. It turned out that she had come for a short while to say something. The conversation was interrupted because a scream was heard from the street. A bird defecated on Snow's head. The owner of the coffee shop noticed that this was not the first time this had happened. He went out to hand him a napkin. The man screaming because of the bird poop could not be Zenos. This is further confirmation. Yuri decided to leave him alone and turned to Blunt. Again, the green-eyed girl had recently overheard a conversation about the treatment center. She works there, and therefore is aware of some details that had already been taken outside the hospital. People started disappearing in the town opposite the bridge in the shelter on Red Pirate Street. Children were disappearing. The red-eyed one froze. She began to understand what was happening, and it couldn't help but frighten her. Such an event also personified the beginning of a romance. Then it was a kind of warning, and the lady remembered everything in detail. After the conversation, when the shift in the cafe ended, the lady went to the cemetery. There was no one around when she started calling Leo. She shouted that if he came out, she would never swear. A second later, a wolf appeared, who turned into a half-human and rushed to hug the lady, smiling. The heroine noted that he really wasn't angry, but that didn't change the fact that he had done wrong. The girl calmly explained that it is impossible to catch and eat everyone who is pursuing the lady. Eating dirty things will cause indigestion, and it is impossible to eat the same thing the lady asks to think about it next time. If this happens, she will be angry. The guy asked for forgiveness and sadly turned away. He still does not understand that in another impulse he will not be able to defeat the beast in himself. He needs to be more careful for his own future good, otherwise it will be bad. Leo is a victim of an experiment. He was with Arachne in the laboratory. The first experiment was conducted on him at the age of 13, and then his growth stopped. If the experiment is unsuccessful, animal instincts begin to prevail over reason. Such mistakes of scientists happened often. The boy is one of the mistakes, which means he may have problems. The girl turned to the guy again, asking if he came alone. Of course, she knew in advance what was being discussed. A voice was heard, and then feathers appeared around which fell down a half-man. Half-raven came down, and smiling greeted the lady whom he had not seen for a long time. She was always busy. The man asked how long it had been since they had contacted him. Apparently, the woman doesn't take a break from work at all. It's noticeable because every time she takes a break during which she is not with her friends but disappears into work. Arachne calmly said that she needed to tell something. The hero immediately lit up with joy and asked to tell. Perhaps he expected something interesting, but in the end the expression on the lady's face did not bode well. Red-Eyed asked to sort out the situation in Carnamale, all because of rumors about the king of the dark world who died of illness. His son killed all his rivals and took the throne. The brunette raised an eyebrow incomprehensibly. It seemed to be from a novel, but the girl was hearing about it for the first time in her current life. The girl nodded and said that she had recently been stalked by a guy. Most likely a person from the dark world was involved in the statue. The matter could be complicated by Leo's death. The raven nodded. He knew that it would be easy to carry out what he had planned. He would just have to try. The brunette was showing off as usual. He liked that kind of thing. The man turned to the wolf cub. The young man did it again, so he was even thrown out of the laboratory. The brunette began to growl. He does not like this kind of treatment. The raven turned to the boy again. It was better to use human words instead of growling. Arachne raised her voice. She had already told Odin that he should not be rude to those who were in the same place and on the same team with him. Having apologized, the hero began to ask what they should do next. The lady was not going to stay. She did not have much time to spare. Yuri would repay as usual, only a little later. One of them abruptly stopped the girl and asked where she was going so quickly. Arachne decided to joke, saying that she got a cat. The guys immediately froze. They started shouting, asking how she could betray them. Somehow the woman decided to take responsibility. Turning around, the lady asked him to stop shitting on the guests of her coffee shop. She knew that it was he who always sat on the roof in the form of a crow. When Arachne left the cemetery, Odin turned to Leo. He didn't know if the cat the lady was talking about was a real pet or something else, and she was just joking. Obviously, the wolf cub thinks that this is not so. The young man exhaled. It seems that the raven will never reach the star. For some reason, the woman likes small animals. He teased again, noticing that it is hard to tolerate Leo. The wolf cub thought that that house cat needed to be caught. He was already more serious, but then the words of the lady appeared in his head, who said that next time she would be even angrier. Yuri returned home. This long day should have already come to an end on the sofa. The lady was met by Lakios with a piece of paper with the inscription, "Welcome back." No one had met her for a long time. It was even a little strange. The body is fine. Apparently, the medicines were working after all. The lady bent down in front of the table to take the plates. They were empty. This is a good sign, because then the young man liked the prepared meat stew. The blonde frowned because due to the proximity he could smell all the scents. The lady smelled like some kind of animal. It wasn't like the smell of a stray cat. It was something more that made him very embarrassed. The heroine noticed that someone was looking at her intently. Turning around, the heroine smiled. The brunette asked to say if she suddenly needed anything, she wouldn't have to get up again. After all, her body hadn't recovered yet. Lakios turned away. His face flushed with embarrassment as the beast inside him began to whisper, suggesting that they pretend to need help. They could use the power of the relic to learn the essence of this woman. Blue-eyed took up the paper again. He needs to change his clothes, so he asks for help. It would be nice, the lady froze. She did not have time to answer anything as the hero again began to actively write something. In his opinion, if suddenly it is difficult, you can always refuse. The woman screamed that she would not refuse. She grabbed her shirt and began to unbutton it. She needed help, but the motive behind this was unclear. When the lady took action, she did it aggressively. She could not miss her chance. Then, when the hands touched, the maiden felt a strange feeling. She wanted to understand why it arose, and she understood that the best moment might not present itself. Lakios was wounded, and while she had the opportunity, she would not be asked questions. The beauty began to unbutton her shirt, but her thoughts were occupied with something completely different. She did not know how to take his hand again. The opportunity presented itself. The young man tried to stop Yuri and accidentally grabbed her wrist. Her face lit up. The same feeling that made her freeze appeared a second later. Everything was almost over. The blonde asked him to unbutton the buttons himself. The brunette didn't want to refuse. She didn't know how else she could do it. The beauty continued to undress the man and came across his chest. Lakios began to feel the anger that usually arose around enemies again. The woman couldn't hold back and blurted out something about accidentally missing the target. A picture appeared in my head of what Carnimal would do as soon as he came to his senses. The man was considered a villain, so the beauty would most likely be killed. Arachne said that she had a headache. And with these words, she fell onto the man's chest. She had been feeling dizzy a lot lately, most likely due to the fatigue that had accumulated inside her. She needed to rest. The beast inside Avalon began to whisper softly, asking if he could take a chance. The blue-eyed one gently touched his forehead to check his temperature. Perhaps it was because of him that he had passed on the disease. The girl nodded, but said that she would be fine. She would rest a little, and then everything would be fine. Warmth appeared inside her body again. It was as if Yuri had regained something that she had lost long ago. She did not understand how she lived without these feelings. When Lakios thought that something strange had captured him, the voice of that beast was heard again. He again asked to reveal the essence of the woman using the power of the relic. They usually acted exactly according to this scheme when they needed to find out something. Tears began to flow from the heroine's eyes. Yuri moved away and carefully wiped her face, not understanding why this feeling had appeared again, while Lakios was angry at the worm, thinking that it was because of him that he had behaved strangely with the lady. The brunette stood up and was about to leave. She needed to bring the man a change of clothes. Looking at her, the hero blushed again. They definitely had some kind of spark. The worm started whispering again. That girl definitely had a not very normal reaction. It was necessary to check. The blue-eyed man knew that the young man had no conscience. Yuri fed him and nursed him. You can't treat her inhumanely. The hero is lying. The rapid heartbeat explains everything. When the girl comes back, it is worth touching her again this way. The darkness will be able to find out everything itself. The inner voice continued to make corrections this time. The situation did not drag on, but Lakios can still show his former inner charm. It will not be difficult to seduce a woman and attract her with his body. Blue Eyes choked on his drink. He was still against such a strategy. In order to hold his partner a little, Avalon suggested finding a relic. With its help, he could destroy the darkness so that it would no longer buzz over his ears. Yuri was still thinking about what happened. It completely occupied her thoughts. The strange feeling was not an illusion. The novel was also a theory from Anne-Marie's point of view. Lakios was not discussed in detail. It was just mentioned that he was a villain. The lady could have missed something by accident. The man could be the owner of the powers of the fragments. Changes could have occurred in the country. Maybe not everything is flowing exactly the same as in the book that the heroine read earlier. One was watching from the sidelines. A meeting was taking place on the street. The master was surprised that they had not managed to catch the man who was on the verge of death. His subordinate fell to his knees, asking for forgiveness. He needed another chance. Since the man was generous, he promised to give him another 10 days to work. The blue-eyed man ordered the fake to be brought to him and smiled, knowing what he would do to him as soon as the opportunity for reprisal presented itself. The lady went to the city. She couldn't stop thinking the feelings that appeared when Lakios touched her. Something appeared and it couldn't be called an illusion. Someone called Yuri by name. Turning around, the lady met Anne-Marie's eyes. Blunt ran up and bowing greeted again. They had not seen each other for some time due to work. Smiling, the blonde asked if the lady was going to go to the cafe they could go together. An obsessive thought appeared in her head. Perhaps she would have a strange feeling inside if she and Anne-Marie held hands just like she did with Lakios. The blonde was delighted with the opportunity and happily grabbed the hand. Nothing happened. It was predictable, and this means that such a phenomenon only occurs between Yuri and Carnimal. The girls went ahead along the road straight to the coffee shop. Blunt, without thinking twice, suggested going with her to the spring festival on the weekend. The brunette completely forgot that this event would happen very soon. "There will be fireworks tonight." The green-eyed girl noted that since her friend had been living in the city for a long time, she probably knew about it and had never seen such a beautiful moment. Yuri shook her head. Although the woman knows about the festival, she has never been there during the period of origin. The girl lived and worked under the name Arachne. This event is the largest in the East. During the festival, underground auctions are held, and one of Yuri's regular customers gave the girl the task of buying the goods ahead of time every year as a trusted person. Blunt brought the girl back from her thoughts to reality. The spring day would be a day off. Hestia would really like to go, so she needed to keep her company. The girl knew that most likely she would be given a task again, so she reported that she was busy. The blonde sadly lowered her head and again became like Coco. In the first episode, the main character is closely connected with the case of missing orphans. There was no mention of the festival. The girl could not stop thinking about the case when her friend was persecuted during the autumn harvest. In any case, nothing terrible should happen because that crazy guy is not there. Only Lakios is in the city, not wanting something terrible to happen during the festival. Yuri promised that if she gets free earlier, she will come to keep them company. Her friend's eyes immediately began to shine with joy. Again, she asked to discuss the time and place of the meeting. Yuri was not against the lady feeling good. Turning, the lady suggested meeting near the clock tower. Blunt shook her head. It might be too crowded there. If they separated, it would be difficult to find each other. She suggested finding a quieter place. Yuri said that nothing terrible would happen. She would find Anne-Marie wherever she was. The words seemed supernatural to the lady. She blushed with joy and surprise. The green-eyed girl quickly agreed to meet near the tower. The girl promised that she would come around 9 o'clock. They had to be together so Arachne could protect her friend from what could theoretically happen. Before they parted, the blonde wished the lady a good day. She immediately shook her hand after that. One time she really loved handshakes. Lakios stood by the window and looked out from behind the curtain. Yuri left, and it became obvious that the man was about to leave. The darkness inside was indignant. The body had not yet fully recovered. If he made unnecessary movements, it would only get worse. Carnimal got ready, and after he took off the bandages, he put on his cloak. He couldn't sit idly by after all. Before leaving, he should drink some medicine to improve digestion. The blue-eyed man asked him to shut up because he immediately started to feel sick. They ate a lot of what looked like garbage because in the morning, Yuri again prepared the same food as before. Lakios shook his head. The lady cooked with soul, so he could not refuse. It could offend. As soon as the medicine was in the body, it became a little easier. The storm in the stomach died down. The last time the beast felt such a taste was in the grave, and he was glad that this would not happen again unless the man once again decided to agree to food. Hearing the familiar name, the blonde squeezed the bottle in her hand with force. The man bent over. A crazy light lit up in his eyes. The inner voice probably doesn't even know why that place was given the name grave. Usually, no one comes out alive from there. Such are the conditions. The hero was abandoned there by a man called Father Lakios, became a test subject. And thanks to this, he got a noisy parasite who now climbs where it is necessary and not necessary with his stupid advice. The boy's father lived happily until he met the baby face to face. He was incredibly scared when he saw that his son got out of that place safe and sound. It was extremely difficult to believe what had happened. The man's fear was well-founded. No one had ever escaped from the laboratory, and the first person who succeeded was 5-year-old Lakios. He killed everyone who put him there, including his father. The young man returned from his memories to reality. He smiled easily after all. In order to get rid of unpleasant memories, he needs to destroy everything that reminds him of what happened. He already thought of what he would do. The man suggested leaving. They had a mission to leave one last gift for that traitor. Before leaving, the young man looked into the cafe and from the roof watched Yuri, who was running between the tables delivering orders. After some time, it became clear that the hero was still having difficulty moving. The darkness was angry, not understanding why he had gone somewhere. Then the blue-eyed one could have returned home at any time, but decided to first check how his mistress was doing. About 40 minutes had passed since the young man left the temporary residence. While Yuri was walking back and forth, he only looked at her black hair. For some reason, Lakios was unable to keep track of time. There were still some strange people around. They were constantly talking to the girl, which noticeably worsened the mood. Many of them offered to go together to the festival, which was supposed to take place very soon. One of the visitors to the cafe was particularly suspicious. For some reason, he seemed familiar to Carnimal, but he could not remember what kind of person he was. The young man took aim at the lady, noticing that she was quite popular. She had probably already found herself company. For some reason, Snow thought that the woman was not interested in noisy events, that it was not at all for people who like to have fun. The hero wanted to go with the brunette. He spoke, but for some reason fell silent and abruptly bent over, clutching his face with his hand. Nothing happened. The guy was too dramatic, saying that the beauty was sparkling too much, paying for his food. Later, the young man left the coffee shop and tried to catch his breath. Then he really felt bad, but he couldn't say. The face of an alchemist appeared in the hall when the visitor looked at the lady. For some reason, he remembered Damon Salvatore for a moment. Of course, it was not a very pleasant memory. The vision definitely had that man in it. It was hard to believe that the girl was going to the festival with him. Snow didn't think that it would be unpleasant for him to think about it, but for some reason his thoughts weren't occupied with anything else. The heroine had never been interested in festivals, but suddenly changed her mind. The brunette decided to go there too, to check everything out and find out if his guesses were correct. Lakios was still standing on the roof and watched as the figure of the man walked away down the street. The darkness did not understand why the gentleman made such a fuss about the festival. He should have left a long time ago and not waste his precious time. Blue-eyed hoped that Yuri had an appointment with someone other than one of those guys at the coffee shop. He was going to find some kind of sign finally moving forward. He jumped over, but as soon as he landed on the roof of the house, he felt a piercing pain in his stomach. The man waved his friend off and said that it was okay. He came to a certain place to find a sign left by people from the dark world. Many of them have a habit of leaving signs in related places that are the complete opposite of their habitat. Usually there are about 20 or 30 of them, but now Lakios has not noticed a single one. He needs specific information from the dark world. He is looking for the one who is called the Black Raven and is called Odin. Carnimal heard a sound behind him, and in a split second he turned around, grabbing the crow. When he looked at his hand, he realized that there was nothing left there. It became clear that the Blackie was not a simple bird, like all the others. Blondie thought that the sign of the arrival of people from the dark world would be a feather or something like that, but instead he met a whole raven. He realized that he could start the task as soon as possible. One returned back to the place where he was temporarily located for him. The task was a failure because some guy grabbed him and almost forced him to stay. He does not understand who dared to treat his favorites so unceremoniously. The movements of the killer's hands were precise and fast. The raven did not see a single strand of hair, not to mention a face. Perhaps that person was a newcomer who has been fearlessly approaching the information place lately. The report of one of the birds aroused the hero's suspicions. He realized that the best option was to check everything himself. The brunette was already going to go, but he remembered Arachne's request. He would have to go to Carnimal and see everything with his own eyes. It was decided to sort this out as quickly as possible and then return to the stranger. Lakios returned home and lay on the bed looking at the ceiling. Yuri returned and started asking from the doorway, wondering how he was feeling and whether he needed to cook dinner. The blonde remembered the food he had eaten before and froze in horror. The girl put a bag of bread that was left in the coffee shop on the table. She turned around to go to the kitchen. If the food that was delivered to the house was not enough, then she could start cooking. But for now it was already considered something. The girl noticed almost immediately that all the bottles of digestive medicine were gone. The woman exhaled. She was almost disappointed if the guest did not like her food, he could directly say so. The brunette looked around just in case she had pasted cobwebs on all the windows and doors, but on one window it was slightly torn. Immediately unasked questions arose about what Lakios was doing outside. The man sat near the table, motionless, waiting for what would happen next. He looked like a big trained dog. The girl put a tray on the table on which there was bread and a drink. The guy's face immediately lit up with joy. The young man was about to start eating, but before doing so, he handed the food to the lady and asked if she would have any. His face turned red. Both Anne-Marie and Lakios seemed to be created to melt people's hearts. They really do it very well. The brunette decided to change the subject. She had plans on Saturday, so she said she was going to be back late. The red-eyed one noticed something. The man's expression changed for a moment. He seemed to become sad or more angry. She decided that she had just imagined it and was about to leave so as not to linger any longer. The young man was left alone and again remembered the moment when people pestered the girl in the cafe and asked her to spend time with them. It was hard to believe, but perhaps she would go to the festival with one of them. Yuri didn't go to the coffee shop. She had a meeting scheduled. Before that, she met with Leo, who immediately growled. Happily, the guy happily reported that he managed to keep his promise. He didn't bother anyone. One had not yet returned, but a box with a mask and a cape was left near the wall. The woman put on her uniform in a second and began to look like a man. The wolf was surprised, but the lady explained to him that a small task had appeared. Yuri asked to make sure that no one approached the clothes. The boy nodded, but in return asked for some melon candies. Almost immediately after Arachne left, the young man noticed something glowing in the distance. Of course, he ran there. The girl arrived at the place where she was sent again. Under the hype of the festival, an auction opened, which not just anyone could enter. Due to the prestige, usually only rich people come there, and you can only enter with a special invitation. At the entrance, the lady was asked for identification. The woman nodded and handed over a gold card with an auction sign. The servant nodded and greeted. He also offered to take outerwear. The heroine handed over the cape and looked around. Her customer is a rich grandfather. He wanted to get the rarest item that was ever put up for auction. Arachne is not rich and came for the sake of the task. She plans to remain unnoticed until the last. The brunette dressed up as a man. All the ladies around gasped as soon as they saw her. Screams were heard. The girl was distracted because it was much more interesting. Two of the guests had the same mask, causing them to yell at each other. And when the one who was rowdy, the loudest, left, he accidentally bumped Arachne's shoulder, causing his mask to transfer slightly onto his face. The woman looked closely. Dark blue hair, but it was rather pale, as if it had not been dyed for a long time. The eyes were dark black. The girl immediately understood who was in front of her. It was the alchemist Salvatore Damon. The guy went further and again started shouting something to the young man standing next to him. He shouted that even though everything turned out this way, it was necessary to find another option. Yuri was distracted from contemplation because he was called to go forward. The maiden walked into the hall where the auction was already beginning. The gentleman came forward and greeted everyone. The goods began to be brought out onto the stage one by one. The very first was the ancient royal sword, and then the necklace cursed by the legendary animal of the north. The brunette sighed with displeasure. The items on display didn't look much like an auction for the rich. It was time for the last item. Last year, the girl had bought a love potion and thought that something similar would happen again. The blonde finally began to shout, announcing what exactly would be presented, and a real miracle created by a great alchemist, a legendary treasure capable of resurrecting a person, appeared before the guests. The woman froze in horror because in front of her was the sage's stone. The initial cost of the thing was 1 billion gold. The people in the hall began to make noise. Not everyone wanted to believe. They needed verification after listening to them. The girl also began to think that there was a fake on stage. It was not clear how a fragment of ruins ended up at the auction. Those gathered began to shout, asking for proof that the stone could resurrect a person. The blonde was a little worried, and began to say that if someone did not believe, they could calmly leave. Only the best alchemists will be able to use the treasure. Those who do not have a tower are not recommended to participate by the tower. The host meant the alchemical one, the place where research is usually carried out. Naturally, the initial price is so high that most people will not be able to buy it. The words of the gentleman in such a place sound like a nasty grinding sound hurting the pride of the great nobles. Someone jumped up and started shouting his price. Those sitting next to him immediately realized that Damon Salvatore was in front of them. People immediately started bargaining as soon as they realized that such a respected person also wanted to get the thing. The alchemist shouted that this was not the sage's stone. Arachne exhaled in irritation. She had to intervene and stop the bidding as always, because this definitely couldn't go on any longer. During the existence of the laboratory, such jokes were inserted into the bodies of people countless times, including Yuri. You can't give the stone to a person who doesn't know about its purpose. The girl considered herself a proper thief, so she quickly grabbed the thing from the stage. With the help of a web, security immediately arrived, and the sound of many feet quickly approaching could be heard. The woman managed to hide behind one of the columns. Chaos began around. An order was given to block all exits. The girl would not be able to leave through the door, which meant that she only had a window left which she needed to use as soon as possible. The girl carefully opened the window with her web. The servants were shouting, asking not to let anyone out. Most of the visitors were noble aristocrats, so it was not easy to control them, but eventually they would have to. They had no choice while the screams were heard. The girl found herself on the roof, realizing that it would soon be over. The woman exhaled and decided to move forward in any case. It didn't matter what would happen next, because of the mask, they would never recognize her. There was also something strange. The heroine felt as if she had hit something when she was flying. She hoped that it just seemed that way to her, nothing more. Still, it turned out to be true. The man who remained in the hall felt like he was hit on the head. He did not understand what happened. Yuri and Damon were supposed to meet, although this was the only place where Salvatore could come, but a simple cafe employee could hardly find an expensive invitation made of gold. The red-haired man missed a lot while he was on the sidelines. His thoughts were distracted by a scream that the sage's stone had been stolen. Damon, unable to control himself, screamed. He even took off his mask. The servant tried to calm him down, but in the man's opinion, nothing was as important as the thing he was going to get. The alchemist was distracted. The voice was menacing. He called the young man by name. It was time to calm down a long time ago and stop getting hysterical when something doesn't work out. The blue-eyed man almost immediately realized who was in front of him. It was Zenos Sheldon. He had arrived on his own business. Silence hung in the room. The man turned and menacingly asked why the young man had come to the auction. He was clearly unhappy with his attack. For some reason, it seemed that the rumors about the event were untrue, but noticing Zenos, the hero changed his mind. The status of what was happening was quite high, that was true. The interlocutor chuckled. He knew what he would present now, forcing doubt. The red-haired man didn't understand how the alchemist dared to try to stutter about Zenos's level, considering that he himself had created a terrible chaos that made people shout at each other and try to take away the thing they were selling. The blue-eyed man laughed. Even when the conversation turned to personal matters, the man only did what he said. Nothing changed for him. Sheldon threw off his mask too and walked forward, stepping on it. The hero grinned and began to speak. It was still funny for him to see a friend in a rage. He really liked something like that coming closer. The man took hold of the mask and tore it off the servant who was next to the alchemist. They had the same masks in the form of frogs. The young man decided to reveal his sincere intentions. He needed to tell why he came to the auction. It was all just to see how Damon would behave. No one knew that the thing that the gentleman wanted so much would be stolen. After these words, the hero disappeared, leaving his interlocutor alone with his anger. The red-haired man, like everyone else, went to enjoy the festival, which was already in full swing. Lakios also went to the city. The darkness inside could not calm down. He constantly wanted to eat and pointed to different stands with delicious food. The blonde rudely refused. They had just had lunch, so adding something else to this would be wrong. Blue-eyed took money from other people. Initially, he had nothing, but after taking out some coins, he was able to eat. The man believes that, in fact, he should be told words of gratitude. In the end, he could have killed everyone, but instead he only robbed. Nevertheless, deciding to buy something else, the young man took the ice cream and began to eat. The beast inside was finally happy, but was not going to shut up. For some reason, it initially seemed that food in the East was only for the poor. Apparently, that woman's culinary skills were terrible. Lakios said that he was not picky. Of course, his words were more like a lie. Before answering, the hero doubted. In the end, they drank many bottles for digestion, which helped to cope with the pain in the stomach, which arose because of the tasteless soup. The gentleman turned around and headed towards some alley. He didn't say why he needed it, he just silently went there. Something clicked in his head. He needed to find Yuri. He smiled like a mental patient, but assured that he just wanted to find out who the lady went to the festival with. His thoughts were so busy that at first the man even forgot that the girl was also going to the event. The young man didn't know what he was going to do with the man when he met him. He would probably just kill him. A man running by distracted him from the conversation. Arachne accidentally touched Lakios with her elbow and turned around when he declared some familiar feeling. His heart started beating faster. It became scary to realize that most likely the hero realized who was under the mask. Anne-Marie and Hestia were already in the crowd on the square. The girl had been bought some treats. She was happy. Her sister suggested that they slowly go to the clock tower to meet her friend. They were walking past the stalls when someone called Blunt by name. Almost immediately she turned and waved her hand to the friendly woman. The two met Marielle. They hadn't seen each other for quite a long time. The little girl immediately bowed her head, which made the beauty smile. The girl turned out to be very polite. It was only pleasant. The lady did not come to the festival alone. Her companion went shopping, so she decided to wait near their meeting place. The brunette often couldn't stop talking once she started. Maybe Anne-Marie didn't hear, but on the next street, a bookstore named Swan had opened. The woman wanted to continue chatting about exactly that, until she remembered about Hestia. She gave the little girl some money so that she could run away and buy herself something tasty in one of the shops on the main square. Anne-Marie heard that the girl wanted another lizard kebab. She was warned that, of course, it was better not to do this because she had already eaten 2 whole ones. Her friend asked her not to interfere. After all, children need to eat a lot to have enough nutrients, while her sister was talking to her friend. The girl had already taken another delicacy and thanked the seller. She turned to leave but noticed a tail behind one of the boxes. Perhaps a dog was there. Leo was sitting there. He was carefully watching the lizard on a skewer. He really wanted to eat something so tasty, but he understood that he couldn't go out. Otherwise, people would notice the lady had been given a promise, which meant the guy didn't plan to break it. Suddenly, someone handed him food, and after that, the head automatically turned off. The boy was about to run away, but he saw a blonde appear in front of him who greeted him, distracted by food. He did not feel her presence at this time. Yuri still could not leave the roof. She stood in front of Carnimal, who began to talk about a suspiciously familiar feeling. The man felt a disgusting energy that could not help but push away. The woman felt uncomfortable. The hero's gaze burned right through her. Making her shrink, it became clear without a doubt that the guy looked at her in exactly the same way behind her back when he was at home. Even if everything was so, the lady did not understand where her gratitude was. It would have been better. The blonde continued tearing her away from her thoughts. He ordered not to pretend that the stranger did not know what was being discussed. Everything was visible. The finger pointed at the cloak. The girl completely forgot about the shard she had stolen at the auction. Yuri never opened her mouth, and so the boy thought that he was being ignored. He could think whatever he wanted. The girl knew that she physically could not allow herself to speak, because then her voice would be recognized immediately. The brunette needed to hurry and leave because the meeting with Anne-Marie was very close. The lady had one more task she did not forget, that she promised to buy Leo some melon candies, which he was really looking forward to. The blue-eyed man managed to get closer and spoke again. He saw how the girl was going to leave, but he could not allow this to happen. Since he was directly ignored, there was nothing left but to forcefully pull out the shard. The heroine skillfully dodged and ran away, leaving the man with nothing. She reproached herself for such carelessness. After all, in front of her was Avalon himself, who is known for his strength. The heroine forgot what he really was like while the young man pretended to be calm and kind when he was at the stranger's house. Until this moment, the woman thought that everything was more or less normal and she would be able to calmly finish her mission, but everything turned upside down. Lakios caught up with her again, who asked if the hero decided to play hide-and-seek. He could count to 10 and then perhaps one of them would still win. It is not entirely clear yet. The brunette actually started to panic. They caught up with her too quickly. It made her embarrassed and almost lose her balance because of the cloak the man did not understand who was in front of him flying into the sky. He grabbed the collar and was going to take off the mask to find out who was hiding under it. The shard seemed to go into second place. He was angry at the fact that someone was trying to escape from him. The body was pressed to the roof, which almost immediately began to crack the darkness inside, immediately realized that there was a woman in front of them without even having to take off the mask. Lakios froze. He began to realize that he knew the one in front of him. The dark hair was familiar, and a strange feeling completely enveloped him, making him feel the same as when Avalon was next to Mrs. Yuri. The man was about to make sure when the girl forcefully hit him in the groin with her knee with force. She threw him over and began to wrap him in web. She did it deftly so as not to let him lose precious time. The blonde was silent all this time. It was as if he did not even try to resist. The blue-eyed man stared at the girl. The worm inside him started to get hysterical again because he didn't understand why the owner was hesitating when the girl was only a tooth away from him. He persistently suggested using the power of the ruins. The heroine couldn't imagine that such a power would destroy her. Carnimal continued to remain silent, but then answered briefly, "No." The beast was even surprised when he heard the refusal. Usually the master is not against giving someone a dressing down or learning more answers. The blonde tried to argue the power of the ruins is intended for murder. If you don't calculate it correctly, the girl can die. And then you definitely won't get any information. The young man was just trying to remain rational enough, nothing more, but only he thought. So the inner voice didn't understand what would happen next. No one worries about that. The young man clenched his fist tightly. Nodding, he himself understood that all this was completely out of his style, but for some reason he did not want to hurt Yuri. When the girl was about to run away again, the blue-eyed man abruptly tore the web and asked her to stay. Horror crept under the bones. Everything happened too quickly and easily. The heroine began to understand that, unfortunately, she would not be able to escape. She hid the prepared clothes in the alley she needed to change them and get lost in the crowd. This was the only real way out of the situation. The brunette was already going to go down to the deserted alley, but noticed a person there when the stranger turned around. It became clear that in front of the lady was none other than Anne-Marie. The woman landed, and this caused the beauty to accidentally fall to the ground. She tried to back away. She began to ask in a quiet voice what kind of person was standing in front of her and what he wanted. They did not start a conversation because, being in her mask, the heroine could not reveal her identity so easily. 10 minutes ago, Blunt was still talking to Mrs. Marielle while her little sister was standing next to Leo. The boy was worried, not understanding what to do next. A person noticed him, but Yuri said not to get into trouble, so it is not clear what the strategy of action should be while he was thinking. Hestia looked at the baby and thought, is it a dog or a cat? The brunette involuntarily recalled the lady's words, the tone in which she said it. The woman was serious, and he did not want to disappoint her. He became afraid to understand what would happen next if he suddenly angered the lady again. The dog took off from his place. He decided that the best strategy would be to retreat instead of staying on the street. The little girl rushed after him straight into a dark alley. By that time, Anne-Marie had finished the conversation. Marielle wished them a good time and waved goodbye. The blonde immediately went to the counters to pick up her sister. Of course, the child was not there, but looking around, the heroine noticed her mask, which was lying on the ground near some boxes. The brunette was still standing in the alley in horror. She couldn't move from the spot, realizing that the situation was a stalemate. It was absolutely necessary to appear at such an inconvenient moment. It was like a special power of the main characters. To get into trouble, the green-eyed girl looked at the stranger. He was wearing a man's tailcoat. Perhaps Hestia was kidnapped by someone similar to him. Footsteps were heard behind her, and again a scream. The main villain had almost caught up with the girl. She had almost no time left. She would just like to get up, put the couple next to her and tell them about the future, explaining that although Avalon was not saved by Anne-Marie, it was with her that he would fall madly in love. The brunette understood that of course it was better not to risk it, so that later no problems would arise in the form of a beating. Red Eyes was very wrong when she started moving in this wrong direction. It was a mistake to assume that the ruler of the dark world would not attack, just because there would be an ordinary person nearby. Avalon would not understand what the problem was and would quickly deal with random witnesses of the conversation. It would only be easier for him. Unlike the original Anne-Marie, the current one is not Lakios's benefactor. He will be able to deal with her easily without seeing any problems. The girl conducted an analysis, realizing that Blunt was in danger, and moreover because of her friend, because it was she who saved Avalon. The maiden decided to save her friend. Therefore, grabbing her, she quickly launched arrows from the web forward. She ran away again, leaving the man with nothing. The worm inside began to whisper that it seemed that the stranger had the power of the ruins. The master ordered him to be silent, while he tried to think just in case the hero defended himself from the attack, but Yuri did not hurt him at all. Perhaps she really did not want to hurt him because in the end, the young man remained safe and sound. What happened prompted him to think that under the mask was his savior. Footsteps and shouts of servants from the auction were heard. They rushed into the alley, but Lakios, having cut all the arrows in time, climbed onto the roof. They looked around and realized that there was no one. Only traces of wire or something similar remained. It was those two who made a noise when they went out to look for one suspicious character. Due to poor preparation, the sage's stone and some other valuables were stolen. It was worth strengthening security so that there would be no problems next time. The guys quickly lost interest, so they decided to leave. There were still many tasks that needed to be completed, and the man was never found. The woman managed to run far enough. She looked around. The pursuit ended, which meant that apparently Lakios lost all desire to do something incomprehensible. The brunette did not attack him in order to kill or injure him. Of course, she could have broken his leg or cut off his limbs, but such an opponent would have been able to do it. Anne-Marie was quiet the whole time because she didn't understand what happened, and she was scared. Finally, she came to her senses and started shouting something about Hestia. Even without Yuri's explanation, she understood what happened. Of course, Blunt wouldn't go into the alley without a reason. She was probably looking for her sister who got lost. The woman said that everything would be fine. They would find the girl together. The heroine had previously promised that she would do everything to keep her friend safe, and she was going to fulfill the conditions. The web, as we know, can be used for different purposes, such as hunting, attacking, or something like tracking. The web for the latter is impossible to see with the naked eye, which makes the method even more versatile. The length of the thread increases almost to infinity, which makes the web very useful to prepare for the festival and actually find a friend once the auction is over. The lady attached one thread to her and her sister. Her strength came in handy because now finding the baby will most likely not be difficult. The girl looked where the lady was, and in just a few minutes she already knew where they would have to go. So as not to waste time, she jumped up and jumped over several more rooftops, stopping in an alley. Yuri lowered Anne-Marie to the ground. The woman pointed to the right with her hand after a while. When the lady thought about what was happening, she finally realized that in Blunt's eyes the situation looked terrible. It was not even that the beauty got into a squabble between two strange people, and not even that she was kidnapped by a suspicious person. Everything was tied to something else. The girl decided to slightly improve the situation and at least apologize. That's exactly what she did. She smiled slightly to seem kinder. The figure quickly disappeared, and Anne-Marie couldn't stop it. The man said the last phrase as if in a very familiar voice. The girl could be mistaken. but the red eyes under the mask and the dark long hair were very reminiscent of someone she knows. Blunt decided not to think about those little things that didn't make sense to her anymore. She jumped up and rushed forward to the place the stranger pointed to. Eventually, Hestia was found. She was lost and sat sadly on the ground, not understanding where to go next. She was scared until she heard a familiar voice. The baby almost immediately jumped up and ran to her sister, who began to hug her. Blunt asked how the child could disappear so suddenly without warning anyone. She was very worried about her. The conversation dragged on until it became clear that it was 9 o'clock in the evening. Fireworks appeared in the sky. This meant that it was worth going to the tower to meet her friend. The girl went down to the alley where she had clothes to change into. Once everything was done, she took out a shard that was in a transparent jar. The woman can tell the client that she failed. She only has a few questions left because it is not clear what to do with the shard that she managed to get. The brunette understood that she didn't have much choice, so she would have to think more actively so as not to miss anything. If she hid the thing at home, there would not be enough time, and then she would have to be late for the meeting with Anne-Marie. The lady also could not take the box with her. Because Lachios was still wandering somewhere in the crowd, she was afraid that if they met, most likely, the man would take the fragment of the ruins. There was a creak behind her. The heroine was sure that she checked the alley several times and there was no one there. She thought that she had run into Avalon again, but instead she met Leo's gaze, who clearly did not expect to see her because he jumped up, feeling scared. The boy began to shake, remembering Arachne's words before she left on a mission. He didn't understand what to do next, because this time everything could be much worse. Instead of scolding, the woman leaned over and handed over some little thing. She said that Leo had arrived just in time, so having taken it, he had better go back. The boy opened his eyes, looking around. Before that, he had closed his eyes because he thought that the consequences would be terrible. The brunette said that he needed to be as careful as possible so as not to end up with as many problems as possible, that he couldn't meet people with the fragment he had given him, and after stroking the baby's head, the girl asked if he could handle it, and receiving an affirmative nod, waved to him one last time because he quickly ran away. The woman arrived at the meeting place. Everything was finally fine. Near the tower, she met Anne-Marie and her sister. They looked a little confused, apparently. What happened affected them a little, and not in the best way. Blunt apologized for being late. They were going to come earlier, but some difficulties arose that stopped them on the way. The brunette said that everything was fine. She also arrived later than the appointed time. The heroine leaned over to Hestia and asked if everything was fine. Noticing that she must have gotten scared while they were talking, her friend examined the clothes. The white mask definitely had a different outfit, and he ran away in the opposite direction from the tower. The little girl asked Arachne how she knew about what had happened. It turned out that it was all written on her face, nothing more. Anne-Marie laughed, saying that she seemed to have been mistaken, after which the three of them went to the main square to watch the beautiful fireworks with the others. At first, they stood in silence until Blunt gently touched the lady. She was pleased that the heroine found time to meet the blonde, always wanted to visit the festival together, and now her dream came true. It all seemed like some kind of dream turning away. The lady nodded. The situation is touching, but she does not feel anything, since she has no feelings on a subconscious level. Anne-Marie was exactly the same character, even in the book. Nothing special. Everything was the same. Her father died. The family was persecuted for debts. She had a hard time considering the whole situation. The heroine was forced to look for an eternal refuge, but could never find anything. She, together with Hestia, wandered from place to place, unable to find a permanent home or friends who could support her. She is the main character who lived in different places by the will of fate itself. The brunette also had no friends, but the situation was a little different. The green-eyed one lowered her head. She assumed that she was annoying with her excessive friendliness, but she still really wanted to talk. And yet, opening her mouth again, she noticed that the fireworks were amazing. They say that they were made by Eastern alchemists. Yuri sees this spectacle every year, but for the first time she finds it incredibly beautiful because she is watching it with her friend. If it weren't for Anne-Marie, she wouldn't really know how wonderful the festival is, so she thanks her from the bottom of her heart. The words made the lady blush and smile sincerely. Holding out her hand, the girl suggested going out to have fun. They were first near the food stand, then with gifts, and further down the list, entertainment should have occupied her thoughts. But Yuri realized that she was bored. Sometimes it was useful to spend time just like that. But for some reason the lady could not stop feeling strange. She just wanted to go home. The announcer's voice distracted her from her thoughts. The Pass the Flower event began. 2 servants came forward and offered a flower to each participant. The blonde, of course, became interested, so she began asking questions. What was happening? Could be called something like the final spring event. In short, Pass the Flower is a boring event for young people to meet. Those who want to participate are given 1 plant each, and then they all have to show their charm within a certain time, with speech, physique, or singing, in which case all talents are taken into account. In the end, they always choose the person who wants to pass on the flower. The one who gets the most flowers will be awarded the title of King of the Year, and a cash prize that many are hunting for Yuri. The game was stupid and the name was too simple. Definitely not for her. Blunt, as usual, had a different view of what was happening. The girl thought that the event was interesting, despite the fact that she liked the flowers. It was decided to return home because it was already quite late outside. It was not necessary to participate, and it was time for Hestia to go to bed. She seemed to be too tired. The girls agreed with each other and were about to leave when a man appeared in front. At first, the brunette thought that Damon Salvatore was in front of them, but his long red hair made her realize that this was not the case. Anne-Marie immediately quietly asked the girl if she knew the stranger. It became obvious that he was not one of those whom Blunt knew. It was someone else. The lady could not immediately decide, realizing that she would need time because of the mask. The guy almost started to sing serenades, the goddess of love, and the moon did not pass by him. All these words reminded one visitor to the coffee shop who constantly told all sorts of interesting little things, trying to seem romantic. The heroine for some reason assumed that the man wanted to give a flower to her friend. It would be logical. The confession did not take long to come. The hero said that he would not mind giving the most wonderful person a rose. Arachne leaned towards the green-eyed one. If she did not want to accept flowers, she always had the right to choose. Usually those who did not want to take gifts from strangers said that they did not take part in events. The red-haired man exceeded all expectations, taking the rose. He handed it to Yuri, and kneeling down began to tell her that this flower suited her incredibly well. Abruptly rising, the hero noticed that he also accidentally made a mistake. For a lady like her, 1 flower would not be enough, at least a few more, just as beautiful, were needed. The man hid the flowers in his sleeve and held out 2. Even this did not quite work because the lady began to wave them off. She understood that she did not even need this. After some time, after all the refusals, the stranger created a whole bouquet. After the lady did not accept even this, he threw it into the air. The petals covered the road and the interested people watching what was happening. Leaving himself with only 1 rose, the hero carefully reached out to the girl and tucked it behind her ear. He was not going to stay close any longer. Turning around, he waved. Wishing her good night, the crowd gradually began to disperse. There was nothing else to look at. The woman gently touched her hair. Everything around her was mixed up. It was like euphoria. She couldn't help but accept the rose when she thought that her favorite character was giving it to her. Anne-Marie's scream brought her out of her thoughts. She pointed forward, asking about that man as if the brunette knew him. Blunt knew from the start that the man was going to approach her friend, not her. The young man fell in love at first sight. Just like in the novel, Hestia started asking questions. Yuri couldn't hold back, so she muttered something about thrillers having romance too. She didn't want to seem weird, so after the question, "What?" she waved it off. A second later, a crowd formed around the friends again. Everyone was shouting, asking the girls to accept their flowers. It turned out that the event was quite a popular place, which was clear from the very beginning. Arachne was again starting to get irritated by what was happening, while Blunt was more joyful. This was all new to her. Without thinking twice, the friend grabbed the blonde by the hand and pulled her along. She managed to catch Hestia at the last moment. They were cornered, so they had to go outside while the brunette dragged the girl. She shouted along the way that they were not participating in the events and sincerely asked for forgiveness. She had a kind soul, so leaving everything as it was not on her list. After a while, the three broke away from the main crowd. When they were at a decent distance, they had to say goodbye to go home. The two went home on a different road. Yuri was a little doubtful about this plan, but hoped that everything would be okay with them. For herself, she decided to choose the usual path. The girl noticed that the flower that was given to her was a little strange. It quickly withered. She wanted to keep it, but realized too late that if that man really was Xenos, it should be thrown away. Of course, there is no evidence that it was Sheldon, but if it really was him, the rose should have gone to Anne-Marie. It was not quite right. The woman decided to get rid of the stem. She didn't want to throw it away anywhere, so as not to create an unauthorized dump, so she went to the trash can. Xenos at this time barely escaped left alone. He began to ask himself questions, not understanding why he was giving a bouquet to Mrs. Yuri at all. It was not like him. He had been following Arachne from the start, and then saw her with an unknown girl who was with her at the festival. The hero thought about why all this was necessary and quickly came to the conclusion that he was just a little bored. Someone hit him on the head, bringing him out of his thoughts, but when he turned around, he didn't notice anyone. The beast inside Lakios quietly asked what the owner had done. He didn't see any problem. He had just kicked one of the pebbles on the street. The blue-eyed man didn't realize that this man was irritating him so much. Perhaps it would have been easier to drag him to a quiet place and kill him there so that everything would be calmer. The hero didn't answer. He continued to build a chain of events. Everyone has difficult moments, so Darkness asked to share experiences. The blonde just laughed. He did not see the problem and decided not to kill Sheldon. The lady received some strange flower from a stranger, but this does not mean anything. He did it by accident, or out of boredom. The lady probably did not attach any importance to this. The person who is closest to the heroine is still Lakios. He even eats the food she prepares and will do the same tomorrow. This is what he needs. The only thing the hero did not understand was why Yuri accepted the flower. At first she refused. Xenos clearly did not interest her. Maybe the lady liked his witchcraft. Lakios also has magic, but it is not so wonderful, and definitely not for women's eyes. If only Avalon had found the auction, where the sage's stone was sold much earlier, that man would have broken his forearm before he could approach Yuri, walking through the streets. The blonde, already being on edge, began to get even more angry because there were too many frog masks around. The blue-eyed man was indignant, but all this was exactly until the moment when the figure of Arachne appeared in the distance. The man immediately found some person with a mask and took it away without saying anything. The stranger stood in line for a frog for about half an hour, so he was very upset. The brunette made her way through the crowd. There were even more people around than on the main square. There was only that very event connected with flowers, and the lady sincerely did not understand why it was so popular. The heroine tried to push people with her elbows, but everything was not so simple. Someone stepped on her foot, forcing her to close her eyes. By chance, the lady almost fell, but at the last moment she was caught. She turned around and saw the same frog mask in front of her. It could have been a good disguise, but the beauty immediately realized that it was Lakios in front of her. They accidentally took each other's hands, and that is what made her experience that special feeling again. Sales of frog masks suddenly increased, all because of one man who staged a show on the main street. The heroine was frightened when she saw Avalon in front of her. At first, she thought that he had tracked her down, but instead of killing her, the young man, with a slight movement of his hand, took out a rose that was in Milady's hair. The girl froze. She carefully examined the guy, almost surrendering to the moment again. He did not behave like a crazy killer, but was very polite, just as the current situation required, leaving the rose in his jacket. Avalon, without saying a word, walked forward, preparing to leave the event. Perhaps this was a warning for the lady not to stick her neck out again and not to accept flowers from strangers. It was incredibly difficult to say for sure. The red-eyed woman wanted to understand a little more, but she couldn't. She knew Carnival well enough. If he had the opportunity, instead of explaining, he would probably drag the lady somewhere into an alley and deal with her right away where there were no people. In any case, the lady changed her clothes and got rid of the shard, so Lakios has no way to catch the deception. No matter how much the heroine thought everything was wrong, she did not understand why she stole a fragment of ruins from an auction. She receives a large payment for a client's task, which was ultimately failed. Everything did not end the way the brunette wanted. The payment for her service was a fragment that did not carry such a large monetary value. The girl was preparing dinner and continued to build theories. Something was still bothering her. The red-eyed girl had no intention of becoming stronger with the help of the ruin. It would not be very safe for her to have something so powerful with her. The beauty suggested that she could get rid of the thing by making a deal with Damon Salvatore. That would be a good start. Even if the great alchemist does not have the best character, he will still not conduct inhumane experiments. He will agree to pay a high price all the time. The woman was reaching for the salt that was on the top shelf. Usually she used the web, but this time she did not do this. Lakios appeared behind her, who helped her get the box without any difficulty. After the festival, Yuri carefully watched her guest. There were no significant changes if we talk about other things. Arachne realized that his health was improving. The man said that he could now speak at least a few words, although before he could only write on a piece of paper. The girl heard what the hero said when they met by chance. She will probably never get it out of her head. Now he is stroking the lady's head. If someone said that yesterday they fought and the hero almost caught her, it would sound quite strange. If only the young man in the novel treated Anne-Marie the same way, everything would be much better and even easier. The girl does not know if he could be the main character who surrounds everyone with flowers. The answer to this question will never be. The heroine involuntarily imagined how the blonde could get along with Blunt. She felt good, just from the thought. They stood in the kitchen in silence until a knock was heard on the door, which ruined the whole moment. Avalon changed his expression almost immediately. He was angry that someone had come to the lady, and even so early in the morning, the girl grinned because again all his feelings came out. She realized that the thoughts about how a man could be the main character were more than absurd. Such a person could only ruin the novel without doing anything good. The red-eyed girl decided not to stand and not make the one who seemed to have come to her wait. The girl promised that she would return soon and asked to look after the soup. The friend did not mind. He almost immediately went to the kitchen. Hestia appeared on Yuri's threshold, a rather frequent but always welcome guest in her house. The brunette asked why the lady had come so early. The little girl held out a basket. It turned out that they had no eggs, and if the girl would lend them a couple of pieces, they could have breakfast. The heroine agreed and asked to come into the house to wait. Of course, this would worry Lakios, but leaving the child alone on the street was not the best idea. The green-eyed girl oddly enough refused. She apologized for the intrusion. A few minutes later, the lady returned with the eggs, which she put in a basket. She decided to keep up the conversation a little. The little girl got up early and was probably tired. Instead of agreeing, the girl shook her head decisively. The blonde felt great and promised herself that when she grew up, she would not sleep at such an hour. The friend smiled. She also sleeps late when she doesn't have to go to work and doesn't see any problem with it. The child shook her head decisively. She will be able to balance everything. She is already big, which means she doesn't sleep too long, and thus she always has more free time. The girl has already planned something for herself in the morning. The brunette nodded, but decided to check something, so smiling she offered candy. The blonde gathered all her composure, saying that she did not really want it, because she remembered that candy as a rule spoils teeth. She could refuse, but it would be impolite to say no to the hostess of the house. The best option is to accept the goodies with gratitude. The red-eyed girl pretended that the candies were gone, which of course upset the girl. So as not to prolong the intrigue too much, she reached into her left pocket, saying that she had simply mixed them up. After that, they said goodbye, wishing each other a good day. The beauty remembered next time she should go to the candy store. The woman came to her senses. She had to return to the house. Lakios was sitting at the table, who had set the table for two. Of course, Yuri was surprised because she couldn't imagine Avalon in the kitchen. As soon as she ate one spoon, she froze in surprise because she couldn't believe how it was possible to create such a wonderful dish from the products in her house. The heroine decided to thank him. She didn't know that her friend could cook so well. It was even surprising the man promised that this would happen every day, and changing the subject asked who came. The woman immediately said that it was Hestia. She is a neighbor. 2 sisters live in the house. The eldest does not have time to go to the market, so the younger sometimes comes for groceries. The blonde nodded and repeated the fact that only these two lived there. The brunette frowned almost immediately. She realized that she was wrong when she told such a truth. If the man met Anne-Marie, everything would go according to the original plot, and the beauty was not at all happy with such a scenario. Rather, it even irritated her. In fact, the young man was happy that he was the only one living with the girl. They had completely different views on the situation. It was decided to change the subject. The girl asked if the gentleman was tired. Lakios wanted to say that nothing hurt, but he realized that if so, Yuri could try to ask him to leave initially. She left him earlier only to look after him. The guy quickly grabbed a piece of paper and wrote something again. Sadly lowering his eyes, he showed that the wounds were hurting badly again. The girl was right because of overexertion. The woman sympathized. She offered to help him get to the sofa. When the hero was laid back on the bed, they said goodbye to him. Yuri promised that she would soon return back. The door closed. The lady almost immediately fell into thought. Everything that was happening was strange at the festival. The young man looked very cheerful when he chased her on the roof. Of course, she did not know the details, but he could have been injured after their meeting. Perhaps all because of those arrows. However, the man could have dodged. In any case, she did not feel guilty about it. The blue-eyed man decided not to get out of bed. The worm called him. The blonde decided to play the situation to his advantage to get rid of the traitor. Physical and mental stability is needed only for these purposes. The hero uses the naive and kind lady who is trying with all her might to help taking care of his health. Darkness exhaled with displeasure. The man made excuses. Although nothing was even asked as a question, Avalon seemed unable to come to his senses. If he needed to appropriate a small house, then it would be easier to deal with the brunette before it was too late. And if he wanted this woman, she needed to be forced to be a puppet by any means necessary. As the ruler of Carnomal, the young man has the right to do as he pleases. Such a person cannot be a servant in the house of a lady from the east. The worm changed the subject. Lakios should continue to cook food if they continue to live in the house. The blue-eyed man waved it off. He repeated once again that in fact, the lady cooks deliciously. The man still decided to finish what he started. He will continue to look for those he came for, and they will give Avalon everything they want, and in other places, they will also do everything that is needed. In fact, he will not do this in order to teach them a lesson, and he does not know at all whether they will have a fragment of ruins or that guy in a white mask. This time, regardless of the result, the young man will be pleased. The cafe, as usual, was not so crowded. The lady handed over a cup of strong coffee, which her regular guest had ordered. She saw how he, as usual, began to smile and try to say something romantic. All his words were almost always out of place. The girl immediately figured out what she could do. She asked the guy if he had been to a recent event. She assumed that he was wearing a frog mask and putting on a show. Of course, she knew how the man might react, but she decided that it was worth a try. Snow thought about it as if he needed to tailor the story to the listener. The guy started laughing. He asked if the girl wanted to see him. He suggested going to the next festival together because this option was probably the best turning away. The brunette angrily said that she would never agree to this. Wishing her a pleasant coffee, she was going to go to the next table. Instead of leaving the lady alone, the man says that the aroma is different from usual. He wonders if the heroine has changed coffee beans. She nodded recently. They use beans from beryllium. The young man thought that these were Carcana beans, but this is not so because they are too expensive. Turning, she asked if Snow tried such coffee. The hero choked slightly. He didn't think that he would accidentally give himself away. Laughing nervously, he said, well, it seems like he accidentally tried such coffee once. That's why the aroma seemed ordinary to him. The red-eyed girl nodded, but understood that she had probably just been lied to. Carcana beans are incredibly expensive. Ordinary people call the coffee they make royal. Ordinary people don't know its taste or aroma. Perhaps the hero was bluffing, but this is most likely also not true, because if it were in Snow's character, he would have said something strange, the same as usual. The man spoke quite calmly. Arachne guessed that he was not an ordinary slacker. Half an hour passed. The young man said that as usual it was very tasty, but he would still like to offer something as a thank you. Sitting down at the counter, Snow smiled charmingly. The lady waved him off and said that she was not a believer, but as it turned out, the guy was not talking about religion. He had been very bored lately, so he would not mind learning one thing. Exhaling, the lady decided to ask anyway, just to get him off her back. It turned out that the young man wanted to learn palmistry. Realizing that asking was a mistake, turning away, the lady said that the young man should come again next time without leaving. The brunette smilingly declared that he could also guess fate. By facial features, the woman did not turn back. She just needed to answer briefly, and then he would leave quickly. Looking at the lady, the man asked her to beware of the bird so that she would not have problems. The girl froze. She already thought that he knew something, but no, smiling stupidly. Snow said that it was very easy to stumble upon bird droppings lately. He has been very interested in the art of fortune-telling and does not even know how he saw the figure of the bird on the waitress's face. The girl felt a little uncomfortable talking to the young man, so she waited until he got bored getting ready to go out. He wished her a good day and thanked her again for the coffee. When he went out, as usual, he was attacked by crows and ended up leaving a surprise on his head. The man screamed and then ran away. Yuri remained thoughtful. She remembered that no one had ever noticed her connection with the crows. There was no longer any certainty about what was true and what was a lie. It did not seem like the young man had just said it. This time, Zenos Sheldon's screams were heard again. She remembered the moment when the man died in the novel. He was mourned for a long time. The power of foresight is very similar to prophecy. The girl froze. She was not sure whether Snow was really her favorite character in the novel. She did not know how to react to this. There were always guesses, but no one had ever proven it so directly to her face. Speaking of the book, the lady's favorite character appears in the episode The Orphan's Disappearance. Without a trace. Zenos was investigating the disappearance of orphans from an orphanage. He didn't do it just because he wanted to. It happened at the request of the Crockford family, who appointed him as the investigator of the case. It was quite an important position. In the same section, the main character of the novel, Kalyan Crockford, appeared, and his assistant was Sheldon. Unfortunately, among the missing children was Hestia. She accidentally got lost when she went outside, and most likely she was captured by one of those who were behind the disappearance of the orphans. Fate itself brought the main characters of the novel together. That day they met for the first time. Anne-Marie cried and did not understand where her little sister had gone, and the man supported her in the novel. The little girl played the role of Cupid piercing Kalyan and Blunt with an arrow of love. Their story would not have begun if it had not happened. The problem was that the girl threw arrows everywhere, thereby shamelessly making a lot of men fall in love with Anne-Marie, who found her beautiful because of this behavior of Hestia. Many readers began to consider her a problem for them. She was an unpleasant character who in fact only got in the way. When the girl first read the book, she thought that there were too many events for one novel. The child, the heroine's younger sister, constantly gets into various troubles. Any child is likely to receive psychological trauma. The author should not have done something like that because the readers really felt sorry for Hestia. Now that Arachne was in the book, she could change everything she was going to prevent the kidnapping of the baby. Because of her decision, the first meeting of the main characters would not take place. But there is nothing more important than the safety of Anne-Marie and her family. In the end, the brunette does not feel anything. So she was not sorry at all. If this is truly fate that cannot be changed, a minor character like Yuri will not be able to influence the reunion of the main character, and Kalyan Zenos will have his own story. Not getting involved with the lady is his path to a long life. According to the story, he died almost immediately, but this option did not suit the girl. She was going to protect him too. The girl was sitting in the cafe while there was no one. She was tired, so she fell asleep right on the counter lately. She thinks too much about the character, maybe because Lachios is always at home. As a real reminder, if the heroine being Arachne catches him and investigates his case, she will never be able to know if Snow is Zenos' favorite. Still, the girl couldn't give up the idea. She remembered those moments when she was lying at home and didn't know what to do. Only the situation was different. Coco was a support, while the brunette was crying that she had apparently failed her exams. The dog always tried to help, and then she, as usual, brought a book the girl would enjoy reading, so as not to be focused on grades anymore. The girl loved her job. She liked everything as a fan of the book. She should not share secrets that should not be revealed. She smiled, thinking what would happen to her if Snow really was Zenos Sheldon. No one knew what it would be called. There was a huge gap between them, but it could be the same person. There was a sound outside the coffee shop. It seemed like crows, 4 croaks, meant that Odin was outside. Yuri leaned out of the window. A feather fell into her hand on which there was a sign they were supposed to meet. In 3 days, the girl was distracted from the inscription because new customers finally arrived. Something had happened in the alchemist's tower since the morning Damon was angry and thus frightened everyone who worked there. He remembered those eyes that were filled with calm. Sheldon irritated him greatly and on a permanent basis. Since he was kicked out, the young man had not seen a single hair of his. It seemed that he was hiding in a rat hole all the time. Sitting down on a chair at his desk, the man called one alchemist to him. He needed to study the case of Zenos. It turned out that he already knew something. It was secret information. The question of reinstating this man in his position had recently been raised. The old men had held a meeting to vote. Salvatore, when he heard about this, immediately laughed. What was happening irritated him. It was as if the Alliance had a group senile dementia. One of the alchemists asked to be silent because someone could hear their conversation. The man said that this was the pure truth which he was not ashamed of, even if so some expressions should be avoided. Initially, the old men took the initiative to kick out Zenos, and then they changed their tune. There is nothing in the protocol about that guy, which means there is no final decision. The alchemist nodded. He asked to find out what his enemy has been doing lately. He thought that he was in the shadows, but it seems that this is not entirely true. The conversation turned to the auction. The gentleman was still supposed to be searching for the sage's stone. It seemed that it would be easier to give up, but the man decided to continue. The words confused Salvatore, and he nervously had to ask if there was a break in the search. He wanted to think that this was not true, and the location of the relic would soon be known. Lakios at that time arrived at the hall where the auction was originally taking place. The hall was a labyrinth. It seemed they had something to hide. The blonde did not find the exit, but he understood that he could not leave. One of the servants stood behind him. The young man was muttering something under his breath, but it didn't matter. The young man had gone too far, but now he would come to an end, taking out a knife. The brunette wanted to pounce from behind. The blue-eyed man dodged in time, making the stranger surprised by such dexterity. In Avalon's opinion, the man was worthless. He was just a small bug, nothing more. He was different from the previous mercenaries, most likely a professional, pressing the brunette against the wall and starting to press more and more. Carnamale menacingly asked if he knew where the event manager was. One of the ways to get out of the labyrinth is to get a right hand and go with it. They say that it is quite simple, but at the same time quite effective. Having lifted the servant, the man dragged him along. After 10 minutes. They again found themselves at a crossroads. They had to ask where to go next. The young man said that they had to turn left. He knew it was a trap and thought it would work. Lakios didn't trust anyone, so he forced him to give a truthful answer. The brunette was afraid for his life, so he had no choice. He just wanted what was happening to end as soon as possible. The young man lied too brazenly. It irritated the gentleman. Avalon was busy, so he decided not to bother the young man again for now, allowing him to drag along, since the blonde was still in a good mood. Asked what he would be doing. When he was asked the question, smiling, he answered that he was going to spend the evening with a dear person. The servant assumed that Avalon had a wife. The laughter made him think that he had said something wrong. The man patted him on the head, saying that he had almost guessed so as not to talk to him anymore. The hero decided to quickly deal with the owner. He kicked the door open and noticed a small man there. The brunette said that he would do everything as it should be, but instead he led Lakios straight to the main one, the blonde in a state of strength with a foot of irritation and anger stepping back. The manager asked to spare him, but it seemed that the man did not care from now on. Only Avalon would ask questions, and if he was late with the answer, death would come. It was the old man who put the sage's stone up for auction. He remembered it almost immediately. He sent employees to return the thing, but nothing happened. Abruptly removing his mask, the young man menacingly asked where the stone came from. It could not have been discovered just like that, which means there was some person behind it. After the conversation, the hero finally came outside. The beast inside was tired. What was happening was not so important. The blue-eyed man clicked his tongue in displeasure. Initially, his idea was different. He came to find out if someone else was behind this, but instead he accidentally found out something else that made him feel wrong. The leader was completely useless. He lied when asked about the other fragments, and for that he learned what death was. If Lachios had known about what happened earlier, he would not have let the man in the mask go. He realized that he was right after all when he assumed that the girl was none other than Mrs. Yuri. Hearing such thoughts, the worm exhaled with displeasure. They had not seen Arachne for only a few hours, and the man was already trembling as if he was bored when the blonde was told that he seemed to have become dependent. He had to fight back. The girl's workday would soon end. They should hurry home. After the girl left the coffee shop, she went to the cemetery to return to Leo scratching the baby behind the ear. She asked how things were and whether any suspicious people had appeared. According to him, everything was calm. The boy turned out to be an excellent guard, and for this he again received praise. The brunette nodded. She took out some kind of package and handed it to him. It was a gift. The young man had not received candy for a long time and was happy that he was finally brought what was promised. In fact, experimental organisms do not need nutrients, including the wolf cub. He shouldn't be looking for food, but because of his past memories, he is constantly searching. Leo really loves sweets. It's not cute at all because he was experimented on at a very early age. Sometimes the girl feels sorry for him, but she has no feelings, so such moments are very rare. Having lowered herself down in front of the guy, the lady suggested changing into clean clothes. The boy turned around. His whole face was covered in the remains of candies and packages that were stuck to his forehead and cheeks. The brunette thought they need to sort everything out quickly so that she could go home. Handing over a napkin, the woman asked to wipe herself off when she entered the room. She took a piece of the ruin. She understood that she needed to give the thing to Damon. If her colleagues from the laboratory found out, they would be very angry. After all, Arachne was also a victim of the experiments being conducted. The girl dreamed of receiving monetary compensation at the auction. They were asking for more than 2 billion gold, and the lady would set the price at 3 billion. Arachne remembered her days in the laboratory. She had a friend there who was surprised that the girl was alive and well even after the drugs were injected into her. The brunette sitting in the same cell with her was not exactly the same. She knew that if they conducted even one more experiment on her, everything would end in death, and if she refused, she would simply be thrown out into the street. If there were no ruin fragments or a laboratory in the world, then the girl could stay alive and live a quiet life. She suggested that Arachne deal with the scientists. In the end, the woman was unable to defeat the power of the fragments. These were the last minutes of her life. Yuri does not understand why she suddenly remembered such old memories. The dream still came true. The laboratory was destroyed thanks to the villain living in the brunette's house. The lady hid the shard and, covering it with a web, told Leo that she was leaving recently. The lady had been buying a lot of food and was heading to the market again. The girl waved it off when one of the sellers noticed this fact. She really liked Lachios's cooking, so it would be good if he cooked something else. As a gift for a large purchase, the man gave several tomatoes. The lady thanked him, looked at her purchases. The lady suggested that her friend could cook spaghetti for dinner. She loved this dish with all her heart. She had to distract herself from her thoughts. Sometimes Arachne reproached herself because no matter how comfortable she was still surrounded by one of the most terrible villains. The girl accidentally noticed Hestia in her hands. She had a basket of flowers, which was clearly too big for a small child. It was clear that if the girl continued in the same spirit, she would surely fall, and that is exactly what happened. Arachne approached the little girl and asked if everything was okay and tried to help her up. The blonde jumped up herself and said that she was okay. She didn't want anyone to help her and didn't think it was right. Lately, the green-eyed girl kept saying that she was not a child and that she would be responsible for her actions as an adult. The brunette laughed slightly. For the first time, she was grateful to the power of the ruins for her excellent hearing, because the words were spoken very quietly. A scream and the roar of a horse were heard in the distance. The lady was so surprised that she even dropped the bag of groceries. Hestia didn't notice anything and continued to collect flowers that scattered. The most important thing for her was that she managed to buy a gift for her sister. Arachne realized that a carriage would run over the baby, so she managed to intercept her at the last moment, taking her off the road. Before helping the woman realize the situation, the cart was rushing at great speed. The horse's hooves were fast, which meant that the coachman seemed to have lost control. The brunette could easily use her strength, but she understood that it was wrong because there were too many people around. The distance was enough to still have time to run. The woman grabbed Hestia, although she did not quite understand what was happening. She was going to run back because she was afraid that she herself might not have time to make that very powerful dash to the side. Someone grabbed the lady by the elbow in the blink of an eye. The girl found herself on the sidewalk with the baby. She was able to see the savior. It was a brunette who suspiciously resembled someone. The roses remained on the road, but that was not the most important thing. Arachne remembered that when she read the novel, some people tried to prove to her that the child was not a character who was constantly causing trouble. She always responded with the same phrase, saying that the baby really was constantly in trouble. Yuri was constantly screaming, but she had no right to vote because the lady's favorite character died. A scene was unfolding on the street. They were shouting at the coachman. If he doesn't know how to drive, it's better not to take him on. While the shouts were getting louder, the lady was still trying to come to her senses. Her eyes were shining with joy. If it weren't for Hestia, the brunette would never have met the main character, who was now asking if everything was okay. His silver eyes sparkled like moon shards and were even more mesmerizing. The heroine didn't have enough words to answer, convincing that she and the child were safe and sound. All the features of the young man's face were wonderful. His elongated nose seemed to have been kissed by God, and his neat lips were created to speak only the truth. His whole body emitted an aura of charm that was impossible to resist. No one could deny that he was the eldest son of the Crockford family. The girl almost disconnected from reality, so she had to quickly answer that everything was fine. Arachne was actually stunned when she saw him because he was exactly as he was described in the novel. Perhaps even better than it seemed on the pages of the book. She replied that in the end, no one was hurt. Everything will be fine. The red-eyed woman turned to Hestia. She needed to know if everything was okay with her. The baby seemed to be scared, so she started screaming and crying. The blonde couldn't calm down. It was her sister's birthday. She wanted to give her flowers. But now they were on the street. A cart drove over them. The woman looked at the road. This was really an annoying failure. The brunette couldn't answer anything, so she decided to calm Hestia down later before leaving. She thanked the man, saying again that the most important thing was that the child was not hurt. The hero said that he didn't need gratitude after all. It was Arachne who was the first to rush to help. He noticed that the girl's leg was injured. The red-eyed girl didn't immediately notice the scratch and the red knee. The guy offered to accompany them to the medical center, but the lady immediately refused. The young man was very nice and polite. It was even unusual. The girl herself knew where they should go and was about to finish the sentence when she realized. The brunette realized that if they go to the hospital, the first meeting of Caelian and Anna-Marie will take place there. In the original, Hestia is kidnapped, and then the main characters meet for the first time. The girl is going to prevent this incident, which means she must replace something so that the meeting will still take place. Still, it is an indisputable fact that the young man saved the child from an accident, abruptly changing his attitude. Yuri said that she would not mind getting help. The man said that he would definitely organize a meeting, and for now he turned to the squad and asked everyone to disperse. The lady pretended to have forgotten the way to the medical center. The girl felt a strange look that made her cringe. Something was wrong, but she decided not to focus on it. Half an hour later, Anne-Marie came running. She was scared because she heard that her sister had an accident. The blonde rushed to the girl and asked if everything was okay. Her whole face was swollen, as if a horse had kicked her right in the nose. The baby still couldn't come to her senses. She just cried a lot. The red-eyed girl immediately greeted her friend and pointed to the man who saved the child. The brunette waved it off. In fact, the first one to throw himself under the wheels was Arachne. The lady tried to shut him up in order to start talking about merits. Anna-Marie could not hold back, and began to cry while thanking for the help. If something had happened to her sister, she would have had to cry with a different expression on her face. The girl was happy that in the end everything ended well no matter what the plot was. Caelian saved the child and they met his fate. Just like that, the heroine herself will deal with Lachios and leave these two alone, allowing them to be in a calm relationship. The man approached Blunt, but she said goodbye because they should go home instead of offering the girl help, and seeing them off he approached Arachne and asked to go together. The brunette froze in doubt. What was happening was more like an unrealistic result. Caelian asked what happened because the expression on her face confused him greatly. The woman wanted to scream that it was Blunt she needed to worry about, and not her, but she couldn't tell the truth. The main characters destined for each other by fate should have felt love as soon as they met, but again, nothing happened. Perhaps the heroes should not have started dating right away, but the lady expected that they would at least introduce themselves to each other so as not to lose contact. The red-eyed one sincerely did not understand what to do now. Nothing could be fixed, or was there still a chance to make a real novel with a romantic slant out of the book? The girl knew that Anne-Marie could also find love with one of the secondary characters, but she was not happy with this. Hestia approached the lady and thanked her for her help. Smiling, Arachne asked to be more careful. When everyone went outside, they had to say goodbye. Caelian asked for the last time if the lady would like to be escorted home. The girl said that she had some things to do, so she was going to leave alone. The man waved his hand. The lady went in the other direction. Something pushed him into a wave of memories. He remembered the portrait that hung in his house. Arachne was one-to-one with the lady depicted on the canvas. The hero understood that he could be wrong, because after one incident he never saw his aunt's face, but still decided to conduct a separate investigation. A voice was heard calling the hero of the East. The man turned and immediately greeted Xenos, smiling. Sheldon asked to call him by another name because he had managed to come up with a name that he used in his life for cover. The lady went to a flower shop. She asked to make a bouquet of flowers that she pointed to with her finger. The brunette nodded. In fact, she was jealous that the woman was buying such a beautiful bouquet for her friend Arachne, turned away and said that in fact it was not such a grand gift. She did not see anything special in it. Red-Eyed was still thinking about the main characters and came to the conclusion that there was no need to worry so much. The reason why she wanted to bring them together was because Caelian was the most normal and strong in the novel. He suited Anne-Marie more than all the other characters presented. The beauty understood that one day the lady would have to get married, in which case Caelian was indeed the best option. Anne-Marie still had options to choose from. If she suddenly didn't want to, then no one would force her. While the lady was thinking they had already prepared a bouquet of beautiful yellow flowers for her, they were truly beautiful. The beauty took the bouquet and brought it to Hestia. The blonde thought that it was for her sister. She really liked something so wonderful, and she asked if she could give it to the eldest. The red-eyed one smiled. Despite the fact that the little girl had experienced something serious, she had endured it steadfastly because in fact this was a gift for her. The beauty has the right to give a bouquet to whoever she wants. Nothing terrible will happen if her choice falls on her sister. Before the lady left, she was stopped again. Since these flowers belonged to Hestia, she wanted to give some to Yuri as well. The girl handed over some flowers and said that it was her choice, which meant she couldn't refuse the gift. The woman walked down the street and thought for some reason it seemed that the flowers were not so beautiful and luxurious, but now they seemed to have acquired new colors. There was a man standing near the window. He was holding some strange bag in his hands. When the incident happened, he was watching from the side because he was also on the street. The muscular strength and inhuman speed of the lady amazed him, and also made it clear that in front of him was not an ordinary person, but an individual. His eyes were glowing with an abnormal light which did not bode well. Lachios came out into the yard. He became interested in what the stranger was doing at the window of a strange house. The beast inside assumed that he was sent from Carnival to catch the blue-eyed man for the blonde. This seemed unreal, rather something funny. The man thought that it was the worker that Yuri had called in. Any case, only Avalon could be close to the lady. He would have time to kill the stranger if he did something wrong. Suddenly a scream was heard. The man was happy that if he caught the individual, he would become rich. Carnival realized at that very second that the truth would kill him. The man approached and grabbed the brunette. Usually rats are always found in the sewers, but it was strange that this character forgot on the street. He would like to crush the guy and kill him, but he kept resisting, saying that there was a misunderstanding. It was difficult to explain because no one wanted to listen to him. The young man came up with a legend he began to tell that he came to fix the house, nothing more. The worm inside Lachios's head began to laugh, realizing that they were being lied to again. If he did not confess, most likely he would soon regret how he was behaving. The blonde would not let him go so easily. The hero ordered his inner voice to calm down because it, like a parasite, was talking too much. The young man thought that they were addressing him, but the gentleman clicked his tongue, showing his obvious displeasure. The man was not comparable even to a rat. His face was too disgusting, it was impossible to look at him. The hero walked forward, but then accidentally stepped on a bag that was lying on the floor. Having dropped down, the young man examined what was inside. There was a rope, a syringe, and some other medicines as a poison. The bag was full of substances that emitted a stench. The young man thoroughly prepared himself. Turning to him, the hero looked angrily into the eyes. A second later, the bag was right on the man's head. The blue-eyed man didn't understand how the stranger was going to repair the building. With this, Lachios hadn't been treated like this for a long time. No one had ever tried to deceive him. So unceremoniously, the anger inside him began to boil more and more. The hero, sitting on the floor, tried to back away, but they didn't let him. He asked why they were treating him like that. For some reason, a brilliant thought came to his mind. Obviously, the blonde was the same as the woman living in the house where the brunette came. He was also an individual. It became clear that people did not live on this street at all. He noticed that at such an hour, normal people usually did not wander the streets at first glance. Individuals of the species were beautiful and attractive, but if someone did not like them, they would sweep the enemy off the ground. Not even allowing them to fight back, their forces could not be put in one line. There was no point in fighting them. Blue-eyed gradually became more and more aggressive. The conversation took a wrong turn, and he didn't like it at all. The hero pretended to be friendly because he really wanted it all to end, but in truth he rolled up his sleeves and almost immediately dealt a few more blows to the enemy's face. The house that the stranger was aiming at belonged to Lachios. He was surprised, not understanding how he had miscalculated the beast inside, began to ask why it was necessary to talk about this, because the house had a mistress. The gentleman asked to be silent. He simply shortened the statement a little, but nothing more. The brunette immediately began to apologize, stating that he had mistaken the estate. It seemed that there was a woman living on this street who was of interest to him, but it turned out that this was not entirely true. The blonde grabbed the man by the wrist and threw him to the ground. He was impatient to find out what the hero was going to do, having climbed into the house of a lonely lady. Grabbing his hand again, the blue-eyed man began to gradually break the stranger's fingers. When he screamed, he was asked to calm down, because according to the rules in public places, you should behave quietly. Carnimal did not plan to stop only at the hands. He wanted to make the brunette suffer. The blonde did everything to make the man feel terrible pain, and after that, leaving him alive, he threw him nearby. Usually, such trash does not work alone. If a colleague takes him, it will hurt much more. Because of the shame, the beast was perplexed. Someone could hear the screams and then come to check what happened. By associating with a criminal, a person becomes a criminal himself, but not in the case of Carnimal. Even if that person escapes Lachios, lay at home all day sick, he would be considered a madman who knows nothing about the villain. Just from imagining the reality, the young man actually felt pleased. The lady was already approaching the house. She felt that it smelled delicious, and immediately realized that her friend had once again prepared an excellent dinner since the guy began to live with Yuri. The house was always warm and cozy. It made her feel calmer. The girl entered the house and immediately greeted her guest. Because of her business, she was a little late, but as the young man said everything was fine, he asked if the lady got home well, and she nodded. The guy suggested changing the windows to stronger ones, because rats get into the house through the window. The lady liked the idea. The man managed to get up in his heart. He laughed at Lachios because he thought that if he beat him half to death, it meant that he would not be able to escape. The blonde should have told his mistress that even so, it would not be possible to stop the situation. The man ran as fast as he could until he found himself in a strange place. Looking around, he was surprised because it was quite strange a voice was heard that menacingly asked if the young man was going to steal Yuri's things. The wolf sitting on one of the statues quietly asked if the thief was going to do something. He asked questions, although he already understood that he most likely did not need answers. The stranger examined the specimen and again came to the conclusion that he seemed to be lucky. No doubt it was an unsuccessful experiment. A guard dog, the man took out a knife to deal with the wolf and thought that this would be enough. But it seemed that the situation gained momentum when Leo wanted to eat the bastard. The worm inside Lachios's head felt that the woman smelled like an animal. The smell came from the lady because she was probably wandering somewhere. Avalon did not listen to the animal at all because his thoughts were occupied with something else. The lady came home with flowers he became interested in. Who gave them? The man noticed that the bouquet was even tied with a bow, and this confused him even more. He was so immersed in his thoughts that he did not hear the worm calling him at all. He was forced to scream, which even made him stagger. Lachios did not understand why it was necessary to shout like that. Darkness asked not to be jealous. The master still wants to become the woman's lover, but it is better to listen carefully and stop no matter what. The man does, the girl's expression does not change. It will remain exactly the same even when he confesses his love. The red-eyed one even cooks terrible food, as if she is gently hinting that the young man should leave her house as soon as possible. The girl's face changes slightly, only when their hands touch. The heroine is not particularly interested in the man, so he should calm down again and finally start taking care of his life. Of all that was said, the blue-eyed man only objected to the fact that he was jealous, assuring that this was not the case. The young man was simply irritated. The cheap bouquet that Yuri received was not worthy of a person like her. A couple of flowers and a bow were completely out of place. The hero assumed that if he were in the place of the girl's admirer, he would definitely buy a huge bouquet and pack it in colorful packaging. The blonde decided it was time to act. His hand reached for the flowers on its own. He asked the lady for forgiveness and took one stem. The lady nodded and turned around, assuming that her guest liked something so wonderful. She did not see how his face changed greatly. He began to get angry again. In the novel, Carnomale was obsessed with Anne-Marie. In general, it could be explained exactly like this: the king of the dark world who loves plants. These facts contradict each other. The girl turned and watched as the hero examined the flower. She, without thinking twice, handed over the entire bouquet, saying that it suited her hair very well. Finally, Yuri began to understand why everyone around considered the young man so handsome. If you look at it that way, everything was more than logical. When Avalon received the gift, he blushed slightly, which he could not have expected. Maybe the plant really suited his blonde hair, so the girl decided to do so. The worm, as usual, began to grumble that the gentleman had gone mad from one bouquet. The blue-eyed man got angry. No one dared to denigrate his gift. Yuri went to the bathroom to bathe and wash away the day. The girl remembered the expression on Anne-Marie's face, which seemed to come out on its own. Emotions are a natural thing. Usually, if a person is happy, they smile, and if they are sad, they cry. There is nothing unusual in what is happening. Usually feelings come from the soul. It is logical for everyone. Unfortunately, Arachne herself was not gifted with such an opportunity to feel something so special. The red-eyed one assumed that she could at least learn to express sadness, just to pretend, since it is impossible for other people to understand her true desires. For some time, the lady thought it was more convenient not to feel anything at all, even in her past life. Her emotions were weak, and in reality, there were no big problems to merge with the inhabitants of the town. One facial expression would be enough. The girl still wanted to feel something special again. She got out of the bath. Turning to the gentleman, the lady said that she wanted to say something. The hero, instead of listening, took a towel and came up to dry his hair, because if you don't do this, there is a risk of getting sick. The red-eyed one nodded, but decided to return to what she came for. She asked to hold hands. The hero could have answered like that, but instead he started looking for a piece of paper. Taking the piece of paper, he wrote that they would not be able to hold hands. The girl asked to do this at least for a short time, but soon realized that it was rather strange to ask for something like that so persistently. This was the wrong step. The blonde refused, but no one knew why. In fact, the hero was afraid that he would not be able to stop at this. The young lady did not want to press further, so she asked for forgiveness for the strange request. She understood that the man did not like it, so she promised that she would not ask for such a thing again. The beauty suggested that it was because she cried every time the girl explained that even if the tears flowed again, it was not the young man's fault, because it could be because of the cough. The woman again asked to hold hands, and this time Lakios really could not refuse. It was beyond his strength. When the palms touched, that strange feeling appeared again. Her face was burning and her hands seemed to be touching her soul. Tears began to flow down Yuri's cheeks again, as if she couldn't hold back. It was difficult. The hero abruptly took his hand back and moved away while sincerely apologizing. The women sadly lowered their eyes because she did not understand why she was being pushed away again. Everything was mixed up. It was as if she was being left in the dark again. It was like the end. The warm feelings disappeared along with the touches. If Arachne were the same, she would know what to look for. Unfortunately, she doesn't know what she wants, but she wants to feel the warmth that takes over her consciousness again. The man brought the lady out of her thoughts. He gently hugged her, making her freeze. She caught her breath. Tears started pouring out of her eyes again. The blonde asked for forgiveness and asked her to stand still, at least for a little while. The girl was looking for emotions and forgot that she needed to feel at least something. It was as if she was lost in a labyrinth. After a while, the lady went to bed. The worm complained about Lakios again. A man who was used to getting everything he needed couldn't kiss the woman, even once the young man didn't even try to find out who she really was. An inner voice was worried that the lady would turn out to be a real enemy for them. The blue-eyed man was going to take action only when he knew for sure. The conversation ended there in the morning. The woman could not concentrate on work at night. When she closed her eyes, only one memory of touches made her heart beat faster. The lady in the cafe was being watched by men who, as usual, wanted to contemplate her smile. The girl thought about physical contact and accidentally said it out loud. Everyone sitting there was surprised. Some even dropped their cups. The heroine apologized and promised that she would definitely clean everything up. There were mugs left in the bar on the street, so the boss borrowed them. The beauty was thinking about how much they cost. It was not in the gentleman's character to just take things from competitors. A familiar voice distracted her from her thoughts. Anne-Marie appeared on the threshold, who waved her hand in greeting. She was happy to see her friend. Flowers were noticed on the lady's bow. The blonde was sorry to leave the gift just lying around at home, so she decided to adapt it a little. The beauty, as usual, guessed that the gift was from Hestia, which made Blunt, surprised, notice the sensitivity. The friend had no idea what had happened earlier. The green-eyed one held out some kind of box and asked to accept a gift in return. The red-eyed one tried to say no, but she was persistently asked not to refuse. The woman didn't want to insist, but in the end, everything turned out exactly that way. She just wanted to do something nice for her friend yesterday. She took care of Hestia and deserved at least some gratitude. The lady was quite sensitive to such things. The brunette exhaled and agreed. She promised that she would definitely look after work. Seeing how Anne-Marie was almost upset, she had to change the course of her thoughts and actions. The heroine imitated impatience. She really wanted to open the thing as soon as possible because curiosity was taking over. The blonde immediately began to nod actively. The woman carefully untied the bow and saw a hair clip inside the box. Anne-Marie noticed that her friend always puts her hair up when she works. If she doesn't like the gift, she could change it. The heroine decided not to change anything. She smiled, saying that everything fits. The gift is perfect. The girl sincerely thanked her. Having seated the brunette on a chair, the blonde asked to braid her hair. There was nothing left but to agree. The girl said that soon she would need to grind coffee beans. She heard the cawing of crows, which meant that a guest would soon arrive. Blunt was surprised. She did not believe that her friend understood the crow language. The girl smiled, saying that there was one person who hated crows. He and the birds had a mutual feeling, so before he even entered they had already pounced on him. The guest was always supposed to order only coffee, but when he entered the cafe, he immediately asked for lemonade, saying that he was not against trying something new. The woman thought that the hero liked the new beryllium grains. The brunette almost immediately noticed that the lady had a new hair clip. He saw such a magnificent decoration for the first time. Anne-Marie smiled, saying that it was a gift that she had prepared. Snow began to serenade as usual. There was nothing that would not suit Yuri. Her hair was beautiful like the night sky. The red-eyed one already knew what would happen. He met the chatterbox and the people-loving Blunt. The man knew that the Silver Angel from the medical center had amazing taste. The guys even suit each other a little. They behave in approximately the same way. Interesting thoughts flashed through their heads. But while she was bringing a straw for lemonade, something definitely happened. The woman noticed something in Snow's hair and immediately pointed her finger. There was a caterpillar on his head. The crows did not leave the young man alone again. The blonde took out a handkerchief and asked for help. The girl was already reaching out with her hand, but the man began to try to find an excuse so that they would not touch him. Everything happened too quickly. The young man accidentally hit the girl on the palm, leaving a red mark. The brunette was surprised that everything ended exactly like this. Anne-Marie was used to taking care of her sister, so she immediately moved forward. The man asked for forgiveness in response. He reacted too harshly and did not intend to hurt the stranger. Snow thought that he couldn't allow the caterpillar to be removed with the handkerchief of a beautiful person. He had gone too far and didn't realize it. Anne-Marie laughed. She always touched worms when she took care of flowers. It was no problem for her to remove the worm. The man thought he had bird droppings in his hair and was scared when he heard about the caterpillar. Yuri advised him not to open his mouth because a worm could crawl in there. The green-eyed girl nodded. It was true, such insects like damp and dark places. Hestia once almost ate a few when she was sleeping on the lawn outside the house. The brunette did not want to know such details, but instead of stopping, the beauty also said that during a lifetime a person eats about 8 spiders. The girls moved away. They were going to release the caterpillar into the street. Anne-Marie was going to go back to the medical center after that. When they found themselves outside the coffee shop, the heroine asked Blunt what she thought of Mr. Snow. The green-eyed girl thought that he was actually a good person. Yuri nodded. The words meant that she had no interest in him, but she liked him as an acquaintance. With such initial data, it would be possible to start working. When the beauty was removing an insect from her hair, she accidentally noticed something red with the help of a wig. The gentleman hides what he really looks like. The situation is important, the atmosphere is different, but the essence corresponds to the content of the novel. In the original, Xenos hates being touched. When the man pushed his hand away, Anne-Marie recreated the scene of refusing anyone's help in the original. A similar incident helped Blunt notice the scars on Xenos's heart, after which the girl healed the wounds as befits the main character. Then the man began to show interest. In the current situation, the plot has not advanced at all. The red-eyed thought that everything was happening again. Only because of her, she saved Hestia from the carriage, so Anne-Marie visited her in the coffee shop. A man who looked very dignified was walking down the street. Some people recognized him as the one who saved the girl and the baby. Crockford came with the detachment to the coffee shop, while the heroine was thinking about how she had ruined Anne-Marie's fate again. The blonde pointed her finger at the man who was walking down the street. The lady accidentally threw the caterpillar forward. It flew forward straight to Kalian. The blonde began to scream that the lady did it completely by accident. She did not aim. The woman did not want to exaggerate the situation, but was afraid that she would have problems. Stepping forward, the lady asked for forgiveness for everything that happened. Snow, still sitting inside the room, turned around. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man really wasn't joking when he was going to come to the coffee shop. He recently met with Kalian, introducing himself, not by his real name. The brunette asked his friend what he was doing in the square. The interlocutor waved him off. He was not going to talk about his real stay, saying that he just sometimes drops in on Yuri. Crockford suggested that the hero knows the people who live in the city well. The gentleman asked about the waitress. It turned out that she was the best employee. Half of the guests said that they came just to look at her. Snow joked that such a boring person like him would not be to her taste. The brunette went to the coffee shop and started talking to Yuri. When the owner appeared in the hall, he was surprised that such a rich aristocrat had arrived to them. The man asked what the guest would like to order and offered him coffee because the drink was the most basic on their menu. Kalian looked at the beer mug and grinned. The beauty explained that it was more of a short-term event to stimulate the sale of alcohol in the town. The young man nodded. It seemed to him that this was actually a great idea. He didn't know that it was a lie, but even if he knew the truth, he most likely wouldn't be able to object. The guy refused milk or sugar and just continued to stare intently straight at the lady. After taking a sip of coffee, he almost choked. It seems he didn't quite like the drink. Noble people are used to expensive quality products that won't always be easy to get in a regular coffee shop. The man drank absolutely everything to the last drop. He held out 2 gold coins, but he was corrected, saying that the coffee cost 2 coppers since the hero had no other money. He offered to take the change as a tip. The hero turned, looking behind him right at Snow. He noticed that he did not know one fact. The lady is acquainted with his close friend. The knights ran into the hall. It turned out that they had problems, and because of this, they would have to immediately return back to the estate. Crockford again thanked for the drink. He was worried about what happened the day before the meeting, but apparently everything was fine now. He could sleep peacefully. Snow almost immediately announced that he was leaving too, and leaving a tip turned to run away. There was silence. The gentleman thanked Yuri for his help. The man is afraid of aristocrats because he immediately falls into a stupor. Without the girl, he would have new problems. The boss exhaled. They still needed to buy new mugs. The girl handed over coins and offered to pay for the dishes. The brunette immediately waved her off. He was grateful for the help. However, even despite the budget deficit, he understood that you can't spend employees' money on trifles. The heroine looked down sadly. She would not want guests to drink from mugs that smelled of alcohol for the sake of the clients. It would be better to buy the dishes in 10 minutes. The lady was able to persuade the chef that she had offered the right solution. He was pleased because now the service will only improve. Snow followed right after Crockford. They did meet in a coffee shop, but such a noble man should not have walked in such a squalid area almost alone with only 2 escorts. The bodyguards must be talented if they were chosen for such a role. The knights almost immediately tried to draw their swords. The master ordered them to calm down because in front of them was a friend. Anyone would look suspicious, saying strange things, but they had met Sheldon many times. There was nothing to worry about. The guys did not believe what was said because the man was very different from his normal appearance. Although they were both from influential families, there was a huge difference between them. The Salvatore family had been close to Crockford for a long time, and not a single person could object to this. One day everything changed. The day came that made everyone see the truth. The Sheldon family, which no one thought of, quickly advanced forward at the end of the carpets, threatening even the position of the Salvatore family. The protector Zenos made everyone bow before him, although this glory disappeared with the destruction of the man. But those times and the legendary advancement are still talked about. The knights did not understand how everything turned out exactly like this. After those events, there was no news about Zenos. There were rumors that he committed suicide. It was impossible to believe that the young man came himself. Crockford expressed his desire to talk to Snow. They just had something to discuss. The hero said that his father wanted to see Zenos. Sheldon was asked if he wanted to come back, but he smiled and immediately refused. He was tired of working. He was originally ordered not to appear in the estate until the death of the master, but something happened. It seems the head of the family needs power. After that one incident, Crockford kicked out his best defender. A lot of time passed, and after all the years he realized that he was emotional. Aunt Selina had just died then, and therefore it was difficult to cope with the loss. The man abruptly stopped the conversation. If everything goes exactly like this, it is better to leave immediately and not listen. They tried to stop Snow and call him by his real name, but he shouted again that he was unemployed, someone who should not be touched. The brunette standing behind exhaled. He was responsible for his family. The friend probably also noticed that the cafe employee looked very similar to Aunt Selina. She looked almost identical. The man knows that Zenos would never tarnish the girl's reputation, nor does he go to the cafe just to remember her again and talk to the lady, perhaps when the image is alive. In some sense, it heals the soul and makes you think that everything has changed. The brunette wanted to answer, but Kalian continued. First, he had repeatedly heard Snow remark on how beautiful the lady looked. You can't say that to your interlocutor, otherwise he will think that she only has one advantage. The guy shouted that he meant something else and didn't want to offend Yuri. The man wants to say that for Sheldon, like for everyone else, it will be easier to leave the past. All the warm memories with Selena should not be associated with the tragedy of that day, because it will be wrong even if the hero comes back and stops pretending to be a slacker who lives in a shack. No one will blame him except for one person. The young man exhaled. He also wanted to say something, and that is why he followed his friend. Kalyan returned home where his grandfather met him. He noticed that his grandson was often late lately, probably because he found himself a girlfriend. The hero is a little busy with the cases of missing orphans. He heard that the man this time found out all the doctors and nurses because he thinks that due to old age, he will soon introduce himself. The hero said that he didn't care, even if something happened to him. His grandson couldn't give up so easily. He was going to bring an even better doctor. Crockford should know Mrs. Yuri from the coffee shop, which means he knows Anne-Marie from the medical center. She usually always smiles at everyone, radiating warm rays. This time, the lady would definitely be able to help because she was a talented enough person. The old man waved it off and changed the topic to the guy Kalyan wanted to meet. He could be called someone connected with Selena. The young man understood who they were talking about, but no nickname suited his friend. Sir went to the main hall when the knight asked if he was going to continue the investigation. The man nodded, confidently. The grandfather was still in the garden. He accidentally came across beautiful blue flowers that reminded him of one incident. When Selena was little, she asked to plant flowers in the greenhouse. Kalyan went to the portrait of his aunt, looking into her eyes. He exhaled still. It did not seem to him that the girl in the coffee shop was very similar to his dear relative. For some reason, he remembered the words of doctors that Bastian had big health problems, especially with his heart. If the boy had told his grandfather about the lady who looked like his daughter, he, like Xenos, might have regained the desire to live. The young man understood that he would not be able to tell. Despite his assumptions, his health was getting weaker, and upon seeing the lady, the man would probably faint. It was decided to first conduct an investigation into the disappearances and wait for Anne-Marie's treatment. Lakios was at the lady's house. The worm reminded him of the moment when they talked, and he needed to understand what to do if the lady turned out to be his enemy. It was time to decide on the situation. The man was holding a mask in his hands, the same mask that the man who ran away with the fragment of the ruin had. The girl again planned to ask the young man to hold hands, but they sat in silence. The atmosphere in the room was too tense. The heroine could not understand what was happening. The blonde did not tell what happened. He was just sad, or even a little focused. 3 hours ago, the young man found a basket in the room that caught his attention. The hero decided to see what was in there and therefore carefully pulled off his cape. He understood that this would be the easiest way. There was an assumption that there was something interesting inside, probably flowers. As a result, Lakios took out a mask. It wasn't even about the mask because the smell was the same as that which came from the young lady. The man didn't know how to behave. The worm whispered something in his ear that everything would not end very well. Now, sitting opposite the brunette, the man does not know what to say. Having gathered his strength, he asked to ask one question. He wanted to clarify about the festival, but stopped because he could not ask about the mask and about the fight that they had then on the roof. A familiar smell emanated from the clothes and the mask, which made him startle. The young man had already seen such a force, but he tried to deny it all the time. The hero feels abnormal because he realized what was happening. Perhaps too late now, he regrets it. It is not clear what he would really like to know about this person sitting opposite. It took the man some time to find out what he really wanted so much. He wanted to know that he was not facing an enemy. The girl was his savior and could not wish harm. He wanted to ask and be told the truth. The brunette hoped for the best outcome. The brunette walked away. If the master wants to know the truth, he can simply use his power and then erase the memory. The boy himself does not understand that he does not want to know the truth. He has too many doubts inside, and therefore the words of truth will only make him more confused. Doubts are deeply rooted in the man's heart. As soon as everything is justified, he will have to kill the brunette. There will simply be no choice. It was not worth touching the basket because before that the main character lived well, not knowing anything about the one who saved him. All this time, something incomprehensible was happening in his head. The red-eyed one called a friend, asking if he was in pain. Carnimal said that he was just thinking there was no need to worry. He needed to ask something, but in the end, the opportunity did not present itself. At night, the worm as usual began to shout at the master. He could not find anything better than to say that her hairpin was excellent. It sounded as if he wanted the same thing. The blue-eyed man could not ask what he wanted, but still wanted to know more. The alchemist was informed that Callien Crockford was investigating the case of the disappearance of orphans. Recently, children have been disappearing without a trace. No one knows who is behind this, but everyone wants to know. They say that the children of aristocrats have also begun to disappear. This only increased the horror in people's reality. When it came to ordinary people, no one cared. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. Callien was sent only when they were afraid that the same thing would happen to their children. Apparently, that's true. Salvatore sighed with displeasure. He liked this idea, but not enough. It turned out that the young man had spoken to Zeno Sheldon. The assistant does not know the details, but it seems that he was offered to return back. No one cared about the man after his resignation, but now the situation has changed. If the Eastern Defender returns, things will take a different turn. The hero found something and threw it towards the brunette standing nearby. It turned out to be nothing more than a magic stone that erases all traces within a radius of 5 meters. He was ordered to follow Callien on his heels. The man did not want to go to investigate, and instead suggested that the master take care of these matters himself. The alchemist pretended not to hear anything because he had another important matter. Someone gave him a note that person had a sage's stone. The girl was getting ready as usual to go to the cemetery in order to visit Leo and find out how he was doing. The boy wanted to tell her that he had behaved well this week. He stopped a thief he had to put men's clothes in a basket. And this definitely deserved praise from Yuri. He couldn't wait for the lady to approach him. The guy remembered how everyone made fun of him in the laboratory. The scientists realized that they had another unsuccessful experiment and almost immediately threw him out. The only one who needed him was the brunette who noticed excellent data in him. Leo has an excellent sense of smell, a loud howl, and night vision. Even when the place where the experiments on people were conducted disappeared, the man returned back to Yuri. The girl allowed him to live near her house, brought food and clothes so that the conditions were as comfortable as possible. The wolf didn't care what others thought, they could even hate him. All that was important was to live up to the lady's expectations. The boy was about to go on vacation when someone threw him a toy biting hard. He realized that something was wrong. The gas made him pass out. At home, Lachios pondered the hidden identity of his savior. If he could judge by her behavior, he could come up with 3 stable options. The red-eyed one could be a killer who came out of the laboratory being an enemy. She tried to kill the man from the very beginning and settled him nearby for this. She could also be a mercenary, an ally sent by the master's servant. The third option is perhaps the most shaky. The lady could have been a good-natured victim of circumstances. It happens that people accidentally absorb the power of the fragments and acquire abilities which they then try to use for their own purposes so as not to let them disappear. The blue-eyed man had a fourth option. He assumed that the lady was born in a laboratory, but then decided to live peacefully so as not to leave the man lying on the street. She took him and went out, hearing all this. The worm began to scream because the words seemed more absurd. After some time, it was decided to discard the third option. The lady would not have been so skilled in her power if she had not gone to study in the laboratory. Perhaps she is still an enemy who is trying to manipulate, forcing the young man to fall in love, and then killing him. There were many assumptions in his head, but what was happening was too gloomy. The hero was again thinking about what to do. The emotions he experienced looking at the tears on the girl's face were fake. If this is so, the situation has changed. He wanted to believe that they will succeed, because otherwise there will be no reason to live except for revenge. Since the morning the lady had been cleaning and running between the tables, she said that she would leave a little earlier, and the owner waved goodbye affably before the assistant always left on time. But for some reason this time she hurried. The man turned to Anne-Marie. The girl could know the reason since they are close friends. The woman was almost crying and jumped up, saying that in fact they were not friends at the festival. The lady met a man who looked exactly like the girl when she was asked about her brother or sister. The answer was shocking. The lady was an orphan, and she did not even know her parents when Blunt asked for forgiveness. The girl said that everything was fine, because there was nothing wrong with it. The blonde made a mistake and rubbed salt into the wound. It wasn't worth doing. She was never asked about her family because her friend had a sense of tact. The green-eyed girl assumed that the lady had been suffering all this time, but was simply pretending that it wasn't so. No one knows what's on her mind. That's sad. The girl told the gentleman the story of when her younger sister was saved. It seems that some nobleman was involved. The only member of the family who was taken for granted was Hestia, and the lady is now afraid to even think about what would have happened if she had not been saved. The little girl was always brave. But then she burst into tears in horror. Anne-Marie cannot even concentrate on work because of what happened and does not understand what to do. The lady came to the cemetery. It was quiet around. She called Leo, but he was not there. This seemed even stranger. Usually he ran as fast as he could because he was always glad to meet. Perhaps the boy went to the city again. The lady soon had an appointment with Odin. She could not stay long. The woman looked around and noticed a ball with teeth marks on it. If she was right, there was a laboratory experiment among the birds sitting around the heroine, pretended not to know where the man had gone and threw away the bread she had bought for the baby. Everyone sitting on the branches immediately pounced on the piece, which distracted them greatly. While there was such an opportunity, the brunette was about to go to the prayer room. She was followed by a strange bird that refused the bread and went forward, hiding behind a column. The lady caught the chick in the web in time to find out where Leo had gone. Only the experiments from the laboratory know how to catch the guy. The people from that place left their bird and specially waited until Arachne returned along the tracks to find out everything. They initially had a perfectly thought-out plan. As is known, successful experiments absorbing the power of the fragments of ruins lose their human appearance and acquire a new form. Outwardly, such people are either no different from ordinary people or can transform the form of animals that they were originally destined to become. Siren belongs to the last option in the world of the novel. There is no race of beastmen, thus for those who survived in the laboratory there are only two ways out. The first is to constantly hide, because if you catch people's eye you will definitely be sold for a good reward. The second option is to stay in the shadows all your life and not go outside. Of course, the woman did not come in person but found a way to attract Arachne with the help of her assistants. The girl does not understand why it was necessary to catch Leo when it was possible to simply pass a note through the same bird. Perhaps there was an accomplice because all this did not happen just like that. The girl doesn't understand what to do next but confidently moves forward. If Odin were nearby, he would probably quickly find the guy. Suddenly she remembered that they had an appointment. If he doesn't show up tomorrow, the young man will be offended all day if he finds out that it's all because of Siren. He will probably throw an even bigger tantrum. The little bird started screaming when her friend asked how they hadn't torn each other apart. Yet it seemed like it would have been better to get along because they were both similar. Finally, the lady arrived at the place, or rather, at the black market, on the border of the eastern and western parts. It became clear what they were going to do with Leo. The animal was sent out for reconnaissance. Anne-Marie walked home and thought about the conversation that she had with the owner of the coffee shop. He had no right to judge because he was an ordinary barista, but for some reason it seemed that the lady was very tired lately. She comes home late. Even on weekends she works. Blunt, however, looks quite exhausted. She is also worried about her sister. The gentleman tried to calm her down. There was no point in blaming herself for everything that happened anyway. It would be hard to fix the past. After a rest from work, the lady could try something new. The blonde admitted that she really needed a break. She began to spend less time with Hestia, and this also directly affected her. The beauty did not understand what she had to do, but tried to convince herself that there was a lot of time ahead to decide on the type of activity. The blonde wouldn't mind working in a coffee shop to become Mrs. Yuri's colleague. The girl promised herself that she would definitely apologize for her tactless questions. Finding herself near her friend's house, she noticed a pile of garbage. Someone left bags right under the door, which was wrong. Having gone down, the woman was about to put everything in more reliable bags and take it out. She heard a voice asking her if she was Arachne. Anne-Marie did not have time to really react as a rag was applied to her face. The sleeping pill worked almost immediately, causing her to fall unconscious. The two who caught the girl examined her, but did not understand whether she was really a specimen. They were told that the woman was amazingly beautiful, but in the end, everything was a little different. They had doubts, but at the same time, it was logical that a random person would not clean up trash near someone else's house. They wanted to hope that it was really Yuri in front of them, because if they sold her, they could live carefree. The acquaintance that the two were trying to avoid seemed to be nowhere nearby. One of them expressed his hatred and hoped that the man would never return. Someone appeared behind, and all plans were ruined. Lakios hit one of the kidnappers and sternly ordered the second to open the bag that was on the ground. He was not going to repeat it twice and hinted that it was better to do as they say, there was no choice. When the bag opened, white hair appeared in it. Of course, it was not Mrs. Yuri. Carnimal did not understand where his friend had gone. She had not warned that she would return later than usual. Unpleasant thoughts crept into his head again about the girl having learned about the doubts, so she decided to hide somewhere far from her home. The young man looked down sadly and exhaled. He had prepared dinner for the lady. It would be nice if she ate first. The man, still sitting on the side of the road, noticed that the attacker's mood had suddenly changed. He decided to act, but assumed that the guy was just like him. The brunette assumed that he was a hunter of individuals and pointed at the blonde, giving her up. The stranger himself wanted to quietly disappear just to not cause any more problems. The worm inside his head began to ask what this new fashion was, because he had never heard of anything like it. In the laboratory, experiments were conducted on the introduction of fragments of ruins. The surviving children became a new biological species in Carnimal. They were called specimens. For some reason, Lakios thought that he had dealt with all of these, but now he finds out that there was someone else. He came closer, asking if there was anyone else who hunted the experimental people. Having pressed the man against the wall, the hero ordered him to tell him the whole truth while they were talking. Anne-Marie gradually began to come to her senses. She did not quite understand what had happened, so she looked around nervously. Her eyes were still covered with ignorance, and the last fragments were not restored to her memory. The girl finally managed to notice two people in the distance who were talking. She had no idea who these people were. One of them didn't pay attention to the blood that was flowing from his interlocutor. Blunt understood that it was dangerous, and she needed to go to the hospital. She couldn't say the words out loud. The woman just silently tossed and turned in place. Suddenly, the heroine noticed that there was a body lying in the distance. There was a third person who was already dead. It became clear as day that it was worth running, but even so it was unrealistic because Hestia was still at home. The green-eyed one was silent and hoped that everyone would disperse, but turning around she saw legs located a meter from her face. The blonde looked around. She didn't understand what happened. She couldn't remember anything. Hestia stood in front of her, who greeted her little sister. The girl stood in front of the door, not moving, still holding the heavy basket in her hands. The little girl said that she went outside to look for Blunt, but she came herself. The woman herself was lost. She wanted to say something in her defense, but realized that she had nothing to say. After work, she went straight home, but returned late as if the journey had taken longer than usual. The only excuse for what was happening was fatigue, which is what Anne-Marie did. That conversation with the owner of the coffee shop came back to her mind pretty quickly. She really needed more rest, just to keep from going completely crazy. The girl apologized for coming so late, but promised that she would make her sister some delicious tomato soup. The worm asked Lakios why he left the stranger alive when everything happened. The young man noticed that the lady had woken up. He even felt a little sad for a second, because if she had continued to lie unconscious, she would have certainly saved her life. The blonde's gaze was directed somewhere. Carnimal followed the eyes and froze. When an animal senses danger, one of its instinctive tactics kicks in. It will either freeze in place and face the danger or run to safety. The woman was looking at the house next to Mrs. Yuri, and that's why one conversation immediately came to mind. Not long ago, a girl told about a neighbor's child. She said that Hestia lives with her sister. When there is no opportunity to go to the store, she goes to Arachne. If this is the same friend, then she and Lachios' beloved are close. The friendship probably lasts for more than a month. Instead of killing the woman, the young man quickly walked towards her, and looking straight into her eyes began to whisper that it was better for her to forget everything she had seen, because next time death could really happen. The man completed his ritual and let the lady go, leaving her at the door of the house. After the story, Darkness seemed to understand what was going on. The master let the girl go only because of concern for Yuri. Blue Eyes simply avoided an unnecessary murder for starters. They should have stopped chatting and went to the black market. The hero assumed that the place was somehow connected with the lady and her lateness. At first, it was decided to go back to the house. The young man went to look around in that very room and found a whole box of masks and those same clothes on mannequins. The blonde wanted to be as careful as possible, so he took one of them to hide his face. There was a knock. It became clear that someone had broken the window, and this even upset him a little. Not long ago, the girl had paid a large sum to have all the glass replaced, because then the hero said that he had seen rats. He felt sorry for all the work he had put into the job. Lachios ran forward but saw only a raven that landed inside the house. Suddenly the bird screamed, calling Arachne. According to him, he knew that the girl was home and wanted to know why she did not come to the meeting. He stated that with the help of different crows, he tried to find her, but in the end, nothing worked. A second later, it became clear that there was only Lachios in the room, who seemed to immediately recognize Odin. The raven immediately began to try to make the sounds that birds were used to, but it seemed to be too late. The blonde grabbed him furiously and pulled him towards himself. Pretending not to be human was strange in the current situation. The raven tried to bite his hand, but instead he was tied up so that he would not try to fly away. Carnimal had more important things to do, so he decided to leave Odin in the house until he returned and could have a thorough conversation where he would find out all the answers to possible questions. At that time, the girl came to the black market, not just to the street. She made her way into the main building. Of course, it shouldn't have been so easy to get in there, so the guards at the entrance asked her to tell the password. Yuri pretended that she had forgotten and begged them to make an exception for her. Once she was given consent, and the words did not end well, as soon as the lady got inside, she immediately chained everyone around her in a net, which caused cocoons to form. It immediately became clear that this was an attack the head ordered to quickly block all the doors so that no one could go out or come in. The woman did not allow her to do what she had planned. In her opinion, the matter was already troublesome. But now she began to be bothered by some pawns, making her regret that she had agreed to the task. The brunette had already been in this place, but could not remember where to go. The corridors were the same. Arachne did visit the black market once on an errand. Serena didn't say anything either. She walked her friend to the building and flew away. It won't be possible to contact the woman. Perhaps she broke the connection or simply flew too far, ending their conversation. The siren sat in the cage and screamed that she shouldn't have fainted. That bird was the last hope to stay close to Yuri. Now it was all lost. The lady spent all her days in the same place. There were shackles on her hands and neck that did not allow her to turn and leave. She did not know if that bird would come again, which she had to call so moderately. In fact, it was scary if Arachne did not save her friend. Most likely a long and painful death would await her. Blue-Eye didn't want to die in captivity. She knew that there had to be at least some way out. There were many thoughts in her head, but not all of them were worthy of getting out. She understood that she needed to find a way to contact her old friend so that the guard standing outside wouldn't hear about it. The people from the lab made the girl sing, assuming that it would attract Arachne, who heard everything. They knew that the lady also had a skill for attracting birds that could be used. The heroine remembered when she was sitting with her friend, and she told her about her true powers. Siren could call birds with an inaudible song. The whole point was that the song had such high notes that ordinary people could not even hear them. The girl herself came up with something so brilliant she liked everything. Sound is waves that travel through vibrations in the environment. The sound is light but strong. This makes it perfect. The woman found where the song was coming from with the help of the song, but she didn't know how to get there. Judging by the device with heavy chains, she realized that if the lock was opened by force, an alarm or trap would be triggered. Arachne didn't care about the traps, But there could be problems with the alarm. She made her way into the dungeon silently, and what could happen would definitely upset all her plans, making her regret them. The castle the lady arrived in was made with the help of alchemists. The maiden understood that if she made a mistake, it would change its structure and then it would only get more difficult. Suddenly a sound was heard immediately. A fright came that someone noticed, but it also became clear that the alarm was coming from another room. Some other person had arrived. The lady didn't care what was going on there. She was concerned about her own plan, which couldn't be left to chance. She understood that she would have to try hard to leave calmly. The woman didn't want to waste her time on this, but despite the situation, she had to achieve the best result. Quickly launching a web into each lock, the heroine tore off the chains. When she went down, immediately formed a cocoon around herself in order to make a loud trap. The maneuver served as an excellent distraction going down. The maiden smiled, greeting the siren. She was definitely calling for help. Kalian was also down there, but no one knew about it. He heard the retreating footsteps and realized that he was not completely alone. There behind him, next to him, was a knight who offered to continue what the mission was originally intended for. It was good that they did not attract attention from the outside. It was just luck. The young man constantly complained that Xenos had decided to refuse. If they could consult with him, it could greatly facilitate the task as a whole until the man returned back. He would be no different from an ordinary person. The squad cannot disclose confidential information to the general public. Searching for children from an orphanage is a very important mission that needs to be accomplished as best as possible. This was the public reason everyone liked, that a rather noble person was sent to search for children. People trusted him because they knew what he could be like in action. In fact, the main goal was to save the missing noble children who can be counted on the fingers of one hand. The rest were a bonus. The girl opened the cage in which Siren was sitting. She immediately rushed to hug it, took time to grow beautiful wings. The woman could not believe that the beauty really came. She was pleased to see it. The friend, oddly enough, asked where Leo was, and this caused a storm of emotions for her. It was absurd. While Arachne initially went only to find out where her assistant was, everything was obvious from the very beginning. The truthful words made the blue-eyed girl angry. She was seriously furious. After a long time they finally met, and the friend says that she came only for the sake of the dog, who should not be so dear to her. The brunette should have asked if Serena was healthy, or asked how she was doing. The red-eyed woman remained skeptical. She already saw that everything was bad, so she decided not to ask unnecessary questions. Nodding, the heroine said that she didn't even miss him. Tears rolled down her cheeks on their own, and the woman began to scream, crossing all boundaries of reality. The lady didn't understand why her friend was chasing the puppy. She hadn't contacted her since she left the lab, as if their friendship meant nothing anymore. Siren did the same, but for her the situation was a little different. They were not the same in their defending conditions. Falling to her knees, the heroine continued to hysterically, be it snow or rain. She told how she had been constantly watching Milady since she found her after leaving the laboratory, in which case it would be better to be the first on the list of those whom Arachne would go to look for as soon as she had such an opportunity. Everything came down to accusations. The brunette doesn't understand anything, and she herself was constantly busy only chatting with the raven and the puppy. She didn't see anything except these two. Serena missed her friend very much. She can't even imagine how much this inexplicable feeling consumed her. The woman exhaled. She was angry, too. All the reasons listed should not have become a lever to cause trouble and tell the slave traders where Leo lived. The boy was caught only thanks to hints. A scream was heard. It was an objection. The beauty did not do this without a reason. She was tortured, and it was painful turning around. She showed scarlet marks right by her wings. The previous wounds did not have time to heal, as new ones were inflicted on her. All this made her mental health shake even more. The lady could not stand it any longer, so she gave up the location of the dog and Arachne. She didn't want to get her friend into trouble, but she thought that everything would be fine anyway. After that strange meeting with the man in the square, no one bothered the lady as if she was under protection. She decided not to think about it for now. Instead, she grabbed Siren and dragged her in a cocoon to the exit. It was finally time to get out. There was hope that the wolf was in the same building as them. The girl no longer had to try to be as quiet as possible. She had all the privileges the heroine asked for: forgiveness for revealing the location, and for the fact that the individual was now in danger. The woman nodded. She would like to know how much was told about Leo, except for the reason why he became a dog. The lady laid out absolutely everything. The beauty already understood what would happen there. There was no longer a reason for the man to hold back. The guy attacked all the guards that were found and tore them to pieces. There was really no need to worry about him, because in fact it was not that difficult to cope with obstacles. He turned into a full-fledged wolf and prowled the corridors. There was a faint smell of metal around the crying of frightened children, the smell of sleeping pills and something else. It immediately became clear that the boy had arrived back home. The place was not difficult to guess, given what Arachne had told him before. One day the lady informed him that Leo would now be considered a guard dog and the laboratory would be his home. The wolf was allowed to eat strangers and thieves, no one else. He immediately understood. He didn't even have to explain twice from that day on. He followed all the instructions. A voice was heard in the distance. It seemed like someone was there. The blonde went down the stairs he came because he smelled a familiar smell and wanted to know what kind of animal was howling so aggressively. He didn't quite understand what was in front of him, but he had already made a plan of his actions. As the wolf slowly began to approach, Lachios quickly grabbed it and threw it into the wall. It seemed that Leo had failed even when he opened his mouth to someone so powerful. The impact with the wall seemed to bring him to his senses and made him worry, realizing that he was not at home. The man ordered the animal to sit, unable to resist. He fell down but still looked around, until Carnamale ordered him to rise. Nothing could be done. Such are the conditions of this game. Lachios was told that the captured were being held in the dungeons below, but when he went down he saw only a dog. Obviously they had come to the wrong place, otherwise it was quite difficult to explain what was happening. The wolf at this time began to try to sniff the blonde. The man smelled like Yuri. To clarify, the young man described the lady in detail, and when the boy heard the word beautiful, he immediately began to smile and wag his tail. He really likes the lady, like no one else. She is special, very different. The worm, as usual, began to occupy all thoughts. He literally screamed that the more details emerge, the more questions arise. The dog smells the same as the girl, which means she arouses even more suspicion. The brunette at this time carefully went down and brought Siren down with her too. She heard Leo's howl but did not understand where he was. They seemed to have come to the right place. There were cages around for keeping kidnapped children who had just been stolen from the aristocrats. The red-eyed one realized that they had come to the wrong place since Leo was not nearby. She suggested leaving immediately, to which Siren raised an eyebrow. In surprise, it seemed that the best solution was to save the defenseless kids. While the two were moving forward, the woman continued to mumble in his ear. She knew that her friend lived with people. If she saved the children, she would immediately become a national heroine in the eyes of all the residents of the small town. Yuri waved it off. She was not interested in such things because they still had a mission. Siren pointed to other cells where not just orphans were sitting, but children of aristocrats for whom a good reward could be given. Words did not work again, and she thought it would be better to give up. Arachne saw the situation. They were already in difficult circumstances, so it was not enough to save strangers. The ladies could then ask what she forgot at the black market, so she decided for herself to leave with only two. Walking further down the corridor, the heroine loudly called for her friend. It turned out that the place where he howled was already empty in the hope of help. The beauty turned to Siren, but she did not listen at all. The girl was either crying or angry. She always had problems with this. She said that she was deeply depressed, but then she began to smile like a madwoman. Everyone knew about the lady's character. She had been capricious since the laboratory. Usually the beauty could get angry for no reason. Every time she saw a friend, she almost immediately clung to her like a life preserver and began to cry. And after a few minutes, she smiled again or got angry. The red-eyed girl didn't quite understand how it all worked. She already knew from her own experience that all feelings are lost when experiments are conducted, but somehow the girl retained them. She would like to return at least a few to herself, but this remained only in dreams. Despite the capriciousness of the acquaintance, her request to free the innocent children was extremely unexpected. It seemed that during the time they had not seen each other, the lady had changed for the better, but her statements about Leo proved that in fact this was not entirely true. The beauty could not grow up and constantly behaved in an inappropriate manner, which in fact only irritated me even more. I had to hit her so that silence would finally reign in the corridor, which would help me concentrate on what was happening. The brunette didn't understand what had gone wrong. Leo had definitely transformed, but for some reason, it was very quiet around, as if the entire building had already been destroyed. Another cry of a friend was heard who said that her wings hurt and asked to be picked up. Arachne didn't react to the request in any way. Leo could fall asleep or find a stronger being that subdued him, given his love for the betrayal of people. The first option was more likely a scream was heard again. Yuri asked to endure the pain for a little while. She rewound the lady to transport her back home. This is how they used to treat patients. There was someone standing in front that was what the friend had tried to warn him about. Kalyan extended his hand, not believing that he had the honor of talking to the lady from the coffee shop. Crockford wanted to ask what the lady was doing in a dangerous place on the black market. She could have asked exactly the same question. The woman did not think that she would meet someone she knew, so she took off her cloak. The heroine quickly assessed her situation because she saw how the knights standing behind the master were exchanging unpleasant glances. Now she really did look like a slave trader carrying a monster with wings. There were no other options left but to start playing the victim. The girl gasped, saying that an unknown person had kidnapped her and then forced her to drag some person along at gunpoint. She wanted to deny everything and hoped that the story might work. The squad did not listen. On the contrary, they became even more angry. The kidnapped person could not move without special accompaniment. There is no law stating that a beautiful woman cannot be bad. One of the main ones ordered to lower the swords. Kalyan could not explain that he actually knows her because she is a heroine. The brunette raised an eyebrow. She didn't think that she had some kind of title. It turned out that the knight had recently told everyone else that the lady had saved a girl from under the wheels, doing it completely free of charge. The woman could not consider herself to be one of those who are truly such a heroic person, but fortunately she understood that this was how she could avoid suspicion from people she did not want her plans to be ruined, and she simply laughed awkwardly. The kidnapped children were released from Crockford's search party, and gradually the lady came to understand that she was in the first episode of the book. Everything was a little different. Xenos was not in the search party, and Hestia was not among the missing. The unknown place was definitely hiding something, but it was yet to be found out what exactly. Everything was calm until Kalyan took the initiative into his own hands. He drew his sword, saying that he would definitely deal with the apostate himself. The sword immediately pointed at Siren, who looked up in surprise. For some reason it seemed that no one would touch her anymore. Only the power of someone like her could create something so terrible with his whole body and creation. The young man showed that he did not like Siren because she did not look like them. He was focused because he knew exactly what he was going to do as soon as possible. The man approached, while the beauty tried to justify herself. Mrs. Yuri was asked to be careful, after all she was on the stranger's side. Crockford asked to stand on his side so as not to be deceived by the unfaithful man. He believed that he understood what was happening and wanted to do everything as delicately as possible. Kalyan dared to hint that Siren was behind the kidnapping of children, when in fact she had no idea what was going on, starting to cry. The girl screamed that because of her only the dog got to the black market, she did not lure in everything else. Arachne stood aside and was silent. This was not in the novel, but she managed to understand the essence of what was happening in a few seconds. The turning point has arrived. Everything is so obvious that there is no need to even think about which side to choose. The main character will always be a symbol of calm goodness, and the Siren, hated by many, is presented as an exceptional villain who will continue to bother, especially with her differences. The girl should have crossed over to the other side without hesitation, but the moment was spinning in her head when her friend asked about the children and whether Yuri would save them. The woman decided to help anyway. She pulled the kids out and asked them to hide behind barrels of alcohol to wait it out, because that way Leo, with his huge appetite, would not be able to get to them. The lady planned to make a big hole in the wall so that they could then leave quietly. Serena was worried that someone would recognize her friend, but she just waved it off, not understanding why they needed to think about it. She pretended that people could be mistaken. Everything was known in advance. The girl nodded. They decided to leave the conversation. The red-eyed one walked back to the girls and confidently said that she would not go anywhere. If she walked away, her friend would be killed on the spot. Of course, the lady was not sure what the prisoner had managed to do, but she knew that she had not committed a crime deserving such a punishment. It was too harsh. No one deserved to die. The woman confidently suggested talking outside, and a little later, they could decide on the punishment. She caught herself thinking that once again she was deciding to save the villain, because it seemed easier that way. She looked into his eyes and hoped for favor. If in front of her was the Crockford she knew from the pages of the novel, he would immediately agree. Exhaling, the young man was about to step away, but turning away, he suddenly grabbed the sword and swung again. He shouted that it was the apostate who made Yuri say such words, just to play in her favor. The hero was going to save her and still do as he originally wanted, thereby killing the stranger. He did not believe a single word. All efforts were in vain. The girl understood that she simply had no choice. She was forced to act. So she had to open the web and defend herself. Kalyan began to shout that in front of him was also an apostate. A strange fire of revenge burned in his eyes which could not be extinguished. The reaction was not quite normal. Having roughly agreed, the lady turned away. She really belongs to the same camp as Siren. However, thanks to what she was told, she does not even regret making such a choice in a second. Everything became clear. It was even surprising. After escaping from the laboratory, the girl pursued only one goal: to live calmly and peacefully without bothering anyone. She did not want to be either a good or a bad person. One order was always one good deed. The lady rarely dreamed of wealth and passive income. She did not care. The woman worked hard and wanted to become a cog in the village where she settled. Now everything fell apart, everything in an instant. The master cut the web and ordered Russell to find victims in his place and then take them away somewhere far away, somewhere there should be many children. Crockford was going to deal with the renegades and was not going to stop so easily. Siren was shouting that they were Arachne's equal, and this could be considered a compliment, but in fact the brunette did not want to fight. She just felt sorry for her past life. Then everything was more or less calm. The woman threw her friend to the other side, saying that it would be dangerous on the battlefield if she didn't do that. They would only hinder her. There was clearly no other choice in Kalyan's eyes. The apostate must die. He raised his sword again and asked what her last words would be. Perhaps he had hoped for something until the very end, but it was not noticeable. The brunette was unlucky in every sense, but she still entered the battle just to survive. It gradually became clear that she would not be able to return to the east. She had no choice but to accept her fate and think over a plan of action for the future in some other city where everything would start from the very beginning. The girl tried to fight back, but Crockford was skillful. His gaze was a little frightening, but made it clear that from now on he would always look only like that. It was unpleasant in her soul, but these feelings were almost not noticeable, because Arachne had no emotions since the very generation of power in the damned laboratory. Now Kalyan was her enemy. History was rewritten, and although it was painful to realize, the fact remained a fact. The hero still had to bring the world to harmony, because what was happening was contradictory. In order to live peacefully after leaving the eastern part, the woman tried to fight with moderate force. The red-eyed girl didn't want to do much harm, but the enemy had other motives. It became clear that if she didn't decide to kill, she would have to die herself, and this option was also not suitable. The web was also useless. She would like to turn the young man's sword against himself, but in the end, even this did not work out. The girl came up with a strategy and carefully tied the stones with threads. When the signal was given, everything would collapse. The beauty decided to pretend to be dead, as if she was crushed by a pile of stones. Then Leo and Siren would be able to escape just like her. When the enemy noticed what was happening, he impudently asked if the lady really decided to escape. In some ways, she was sorry that she would never again be able to take advantage of the benefits of the eastern part of the country, but it was better than running from someone who wanted to finish her off. The red-eyed one didn't care where she lived. peacefully. The main thing was that everything around was normal, and there were familiar people from the laboratory. The girl jumped back to let the stones fall and accidentally bumped into something soft with her back. It turned out that Leo was behind her, who happily began to wag his tail, shouting that he had found a woman. She did not immediately understand how she had been tracked down, but was happy that everything worked out. Crockford raised an eyebrow in displeasure. Either a huge monster or another renegade stood before him. A masked man stepped forward. He didn't care who was in front of him because he could deal with them one by one. The best way to defeat an enemy was to separate him with support. Everyone is talking about the hero from the East, and Lachios was wondering who he was and why he was so great. Everyone there was nothing special about the man. It was even a little sad that expectations were not met. While Kalyan flew to the side on the battlefield, the lady quickly hid behind the wolf's back. She did not understand that her friend had forgotten her at the black market and sincerely hoped that he did not know her. Leo leaned over to the girl and asked if she was hurt. This reached the ears of the gentleman who froze. While the young man was a little distracted, the brunette recovered and was about to attack again at the last moment. Carnimal stopped the sword with his bare hands. He should have been calmer, but the Eastern dog did not stop screaming. He did not like the very idea of what was happening. The man was not supposed to answer the questions put to him. Considering that the enemy did not even have the right to ask them, the sword broke into several pieces. At that moment the knights returned who saw the scene of what was happening. They did not understand how this was possible. The master had ordered them to run away long ago, but they didn't do it. They found a child nearby and decided to conduct an additional search to see if there was anyone else in the building. It was all just too suspicious. Someone else arrived, and immediately one of them started screaming, complaining that it was taking too long to catch the individual. The expensive individual was thrown in the corridor, and they picked it up, although Siren tried with all her might to escape. They did not immediately realize that Kalyan was in front of them. Immediately a frightened cry and questions were heard, because it was interesting what happened. No one said that the attacker was Crockford. There was chaos all around, but it was a great chance for the heroine. She asked Leo to get ready. The woman was able to grab the siren and, shouting to the man giving the command, allowed him to run away and destroy everything around. Kalyan managed to react almost immediately and ordered a tracking device to be attached to the girl. The traders had already begun to complain because they knew that for the fact that they failed to catch the individual, the owner would kill them. One asked the second to bring a crossbow in order to get the girl at least in a dead state. Lachios's voice was heard. He ordered everyone in the room not to move. The man ordered to forget about what happened and to forget about the apostates who had to escape. A few seconds later, a strange feeling appeared. The knights woke up and began to look at each other, asking each other how they ended up in a strange corridor. They were looking for the missing children, but then it was as if there was a gap in their memory. The girl returned to work in the morning as if nothing had happened. She decided that now she would not have to change her place of residence. Surprisingly, she even managed to return to her normal, familiar life. After listening to Leo, the lady returned to the east, just in case the heroine overheard the conversations of the search party. But there was not a word about the events on the black market. No one suspected anything. Everyone really forgot everything but not Yuri. The situation confused her because she should have lost her memory too. The boss distracted him from his thoughts. He felt an ominous feeling. Anna-Marie and Kalyan were on the threshold. The guy was smiling, but the lady was not entirely comfortable next to him. She remembered his look. It was the look of a man who sincerely wanted someone to die. The man sat down with the girl at a free table and started talking about something. The lady was sitting at the bar and did not hear a word. Perhaps the hero used some alchemical things for soundproofing. The red-eyed one assumed that the couple was flirting, and soon she was convinced because she saw how Blunt's face blushed. She wanted to hope that everything would be fine. Why Kalyan hated the apostates to death. It was even strange. If you think about it in a sense, Anne-Marie was also an apostate, because inside her heart was the power of the ruins, which she received by pure chance. In the novel, there were no problems with this fact. The hero either did not know anything or fell in love with the lady so much that he decided not to pay attention to it. The brunette had too many questions, and this began to irritate. No one gave answers. After 10 minutes, the man left the coffee shop. The blonde sighed. For some reason, she thought that what was offered to her would be too strong a thing. Her friend did not understand what was being discussed, but again she could not find the strength to ask. In novels, usually, if the characters feel something is wrong, they usually break up. Mrs. Yuri herself was confused about what she was thinking. In fact, the situation was related to work. The green-eyed woman smiled and assured that there would be no problems. The woman was getting ready to leave. She needed to help in the bakery where she got a job while she took a leave from the medical center. After the working day, Arachne went to the prayer house, which was located in the cemetery, where she placed not only Leo, but also Siren, and from the doorway the girl answered the question about Odin, who never showed up. The heroine nodded. She was a little upset or embarrassed, but at the same time she was simply confused. She asked to take care of her condition and not fight with the wolf and then left. The woman also did not understand that it was strange the raven should have gone to the meeting place at least after Arachne called him. He really respected her, so this was not the reason. The brunette assumed that the boy was very offended when they meet. She will definitely apologize. After that day, the lady began to live a normal life again. She returned home, but for the first time she discovered that the room was completely empty. Lakios was missing.